Look closely at the 1972 satellite survey of downtown Omaha, Nebraska. At the corner of 400 to North Street, there is a fortress, a 10-story Brutalist monolith of concrete and lead. Now, look at the 1973 survey. The building is gone, not demolished, not replaced, erased. There are no permits, no news reports, and no rubble. In the municipal basement, there is only a geographic silence, a hole in the world where 1,000,000 tons of steel once stood. This is our starting point, a physical impossibility hidden in plain sight for 50 years. Tonight, we go inside the folders stamped never open. You will discover the hidden truth of Project 19 Sigma and the 400 ordinary Americans who entered that building every morning. They were accountants and clerks with families and mortgages. By the winter of 1973, not one of them appeared on a census, a payroll, or a death registry. They were reclassified as structural components. We have recovered their medical logs, records of blood that crystallized into geometric patterns and eyes that began to vibrate in sync with the walls. They didn't just work in the building, they became the building. You will learn the science of the ghost frequency, 18.98 GE. This is the exact rate at which the human eyeball resonates. We will show you the blueprints of an architecture designed not for shelter, but for resonance, a building shaped like a giant tuning fork, designed to bypass the conscious mind and write data directly onto the retina. You will see the evidence of the gray man, a shared visual glitch reported by 400 people simultaneously, a phantom born from the vibration of the air itself. But the most terrifying discovery lies in the present. We will trace the signal from the ash and sterile soil of the Omaha Dead Zone into the very digital grid you are using to watch this video. We found the frequency hidden in the background noise of the National Archive, a subaudible broadcast that has been waiting 50 years for a receiver. By the end of this investigation, you will understand that the building was never destroyed. It was inverted. It is still there, beneath the soil, and through the speakers of your device. It is still breathing. The records for the city of Omaha, Nebraska, are remarkably thorough. Every brick, every pipe, and every zoning permit from the last century is accounted for in the municipal basement, except for one. At the corner of 400 to North Street, there is a geographic silence. To the casual observer, it is an unremarkable, empty lot, a patch of gray soil where even the weeds seem hesitant to grow. But if you look at the 1972 satellite survey, a massive brutalist structure stands there. It is a fortress of concrete and steel, occupying a full city block. By the 1973 survey, it is gone. Not demolished, not replaced, erased. There are no demolition permits, no local news reports of a fire, no debris removal logs. It is as if the building was never built. Yet the shadows it cast in the 1972 photographs remain as physical proof of a classified anomaly. The few documents we recovered were hidden in an encrypted subfolder of a decommissioned NSA server, stamped with a digital watermark that reads, "Never open." The ink on the physical files we found later is cold, the paper brittle with the weight of a hidden truth that the city has spent 50 years trying to forget. The file was stamped "Never open." Yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this room is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server rack. A single monitor flickers in the dark, casting a pale blue light over the desk. The air in the archive is cold, smelling faintly of ozone and old dust. As we pull the first folder from its steel drawer, the ink feels raised, almost vibrating under the touch. The paper is heavy, a relic of a time when secrets were kept in filing cabinets rather than clouds. We are looking at a 50-year discrepancy, a hole in history that shouldn't exist. In the early 1970s, the American landscape was changing. The optimism of the space age was being replaced by the heavy, oppressive weight of the Cold War's middle act. In Omaha, the construction at 400 to North Street began in silence. There were no groundbreaking ceremonies, no politicians posing with golden shovels. The trucks arrived at 3 a.m., unloading massive slabs of precast concrete that seemed to absorb the light of the street lamps. The locals called it the gray box. It had no windows, no signage, no visible entrance other than a single, reinforced steel door on the north face. For 90 days, the building stood as a silent sentinel in the heart of the city. And then, during a weekend in late October, the block went dark. Intellectual curiosity leads us to the blueprints. When we compare the city's official 1972 zoning map with the one found in the private collection of a deceased city planner, the discrepancy becomes a chilling reality. The official map shows 400 to North Street as a proposed park space. The private map, however, labels it as Site 19 Sigma, Acoustic Research Facility. The architectural style was brutalist, a movement defined by raw concrete and a sense of overwhelming power. But Site 19 Sigma was different. The walls weren't just thick. They were layered with lead and a specific type of high-density foam typically used in soundproof chambers. The internal layout was a labyrinth of tapering hallways and low ceilings. One might wonder why a government administrative office would need the acoustic properties of a recording studio. As we scan the digitized blueprints, a faint static hiss seems to emanate from the speakers. It is a subtle reminder of the nature of this facility. The building was designed to be a giant tuning fork. Every corridor was an echo chamber. Every room was ARESONATOR. By mid-September 1972, the building was fully staffed. According to the payroll records which were filed under a shell corporation named Standard Logistics, approximately 400 people entered that building every morning. They were accountants, data entry clerks, and mid-level bureaucrats. They were ordinary Americans with families, mortgages, and quiet lives. Yet, not one of them is listed in the 1973 census for the state of Nebraska. It is here that the intellectual dread begins to settle. How do 400 people and a 10-story concrete building vanish from the record in less than a year? The archives suggest a systematic scrubbing of the local reality. The physical evidence was removed, but the psychological shadow remained. We found a letter, handwritten on the back of a cafeteria menu, dated October 12, 1972. It was tucked inside a vent in a nearby library. The handwriting is shaky, the ink smudged as if the writer's hand was vibrating. It reads, "The walls are singing. No one else will admit it, but we all feel the pressure in our ears. It's a low, constant thrum that makes the coffee in my cup ripple even when the building is perfectly still. Mr. Henderson from the 3rd floor hasn't blinked in 10 minutes. He just stares at the concrete. I think the building is breathing, and we are the air, the cold." Analytical truth is that governments are very good at losing things, but they are even better at making sure things were never found in the first place. When we contacted the National Archives regarding Project 19's, the response was a form letter, a cold, automated denial of existence. No records match the requested parameters. But the archive chill comes from the things they didn't delete. We found a requisition order for 5,000 gallons of high-grade industrial solvent, delivered to 402 North Street on October 20, 1972. The order was signed by a man named Dr. Eris Thorne. When we searched for Dr. Thorne, we found a death certificate from 1968. Had died for years before he signed the order. This is the hallmark of a ghost project, a classified operation that uses the identities of the deceased to mask the activities of the living. The solvent was used to clean the interior of the building before the erasure began. But what were they cleaning? The monitor flickers again. A faint digital glitch appears on the screen, a series of vertical lines that resemble the bars of a cage. We are looking at a medical log from the final week of the facility's operation. The entries are clinical, devoid of emotion, which only makes the content more unsettling. Subject 114 reports persistent visual anomalies, claims the shadows in the hallway are detached from the objects casting them. Subject 209 exhibits signs of resonant ocular distress. The eyes are vibrating in sync with the building's ambient frequency. Subject 380 disappeared during the lunch break. No exit recorded on security cameras. The room was empty, but the chair was still warm. These logs were never meant to be read by the public. They represent a cold, scientific observation of a human workforce being subjected to an environment that the human brain was never designed to inhabit. The 18.98 Hz frequency, the ghost frequency, wasn't just a byproduct of the building's design. It was the purpose. As the night deepens, the air in our archive seems to grow thinner. We are digging into a 50-year discrepancy that has been buried under layers of bureaucratic static. The building at 402 North Street was a physical manifestation of a secret that the American government deemed too dangerous to keep on the map. They removed the concrete, they removed the people, they even tried to remove the soil. But as we look at the modern-day footage of that empty lot, we notice something. The camera's autofocus struggles to lock onto the center of the plot. There is a slight distortion in the air, a shimmering heat haze that exists even in the dead of winter. It is a visual echo of the building that isn't there. To understand the discrepancy, one must understand the architect. We tracked down the estate of the man who designed Site 19 Sigma. His name was Elias Vance, a man who specialized in acoustic brutalism. In his private journals, he spoke of architecture not as shelter, but as a medium for frequency. Concrete is not a silent material, Vance wrote in his final entry. It is a conductor. If you shape it correctly, you can create a space where the air itself becomes a weapon. At 18.98 Hz, the human eye begins to resonate. The brain cannot process the data correctly. It begins to fill in the gaps with its own fears. You don't need to haunt a building if the building creates the ghosts for you. This brings us back to the empty lot in Omaha. If the building was demolished, where did the material go? A 10-story concrete structure doesn't just vanish. There are no records of the debris being taken to any local landfill. There are no sightings of a massive convoy of dump trucks. The most disturbing theory, found in a leaked memo from a former city engineer, suggests that the building wasn't torn down. It was inverted. The memo speaks of a controlled collapse into the sub-basement levels, followed by the pouring of 6 feet of lead-lined topsoil over the site. If this is true, then 400 to North Street isn't empty. The gray box is still there, buried beneath the surface. Its tapering hallways and acoustic chambers intact, still humming at a frequency that the world has forgotten. The discrepancies in the archives are not mistakes, they are scars. Every missing file, every erased name, and every falsified map is a suture holding the secret in place. But sutures can fail. As we close this first chapter of the investigation, the quiet dread remains. We have identified the hole in the map. We have seen the shadows of the missing, but the true nature of the experiment, the reason why 400 people had to be erased from the census steeper within the blueprints. The ventilation system wasn't designed to move air, it was designed to move sound, and the sound it was moving was not meant for human ears. The blueprints for the basement levels of Site 19 Sigma contain a structural anomaly that defies modern engineering. While the upper floors were designed for acoustic submission, the basement was designed for something far more specific. It was a resonance chamber shaped like a human inner ear, but 1,000 times larger. The declassified files refer to this as the amplification node. As we prepare to look at the internal layouts of that basement, we found a final note from Dr. Thorne. It was dated the day the building vanished. It contains only 4 words, written in a bold, frantic hand. The frequency is escaping. The map shows an empty lot, but the sensors tell a different story. If the building is gone, why is the ground still humming? We turn the page to the next file, where the true purpose of the 18.98 Hz frequency is revealed. It wasn't about the people inside the building. It was about what the building was trying to call from the outside. The blueprints for Site 19 Sigma were never intended to be seen by human eyes outside of the Department of Defense. They were held within a triple-layered encrypted digital vault, a classified archive designed to be erased automatically if an unauthorized terminal attempted access. What we are looking at is not merely a floor plan for a building, it is a schematic for a weaponized anomaly. These documents describe an architectural impossibility, a structure where the geometry of the hallways contradicts the laws of standard acoustics. To the modern researcher, these lines on faded vellum represent a hidden truth, that for 90 days in 1972, the American government successfully constructed a physical circuit board made of reinforced concrete and lead. Every measurement, every angle, and every structural pillar was calculated to serve a single, dark purpose. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this space is the rhythmic mechanical pulse of the high-speed scanner. The air in the archive is unnervingly cold, carrying the faint, sharp scent of ozone and the heavy weight of static electricity. A single monitor flickers in the corner of the room, casting a pale, sickly green glow over the blueprints. As you run your fingers across the digital reproduction of the schematics, the ink seems to vibrate, a phantom sensation that travels from the screen into your very bones. We are stepping into the mind of Elias Vance, an architect who believed that walls should not just hold up a ceiling, but should actively manipulate the consciousness of those within them. As we analyze the first level of the blueprints, the clinical nature of the design becomes apparent. There are no windows. There are no communal spaces. Instead, the floor plan is a series of concentric circles, intersected by tapering corridors that narrow as they approach the center of the building. In any other structure, this would be a tragic waste of space. In Site 19 Sigma, it is a waveguide. These hallways were designed to compress air, to funnel ambient sound into a singular, low-frequency pulse. The documents reveal that the concrete used in the construction was not standard grade. It was infused with a proprietary crystalline aggregate, a material that, according to the array's technical logs, was designed to resonate at specific subaudible frequencies. The architectural drawings show that the building's foundation was decoupled from the earth by a series of massive lead springs, ensuring that no external vibration could interfere with the internal frequency. It was a closed system, an ivory tower of infrasound. Deep within the second level of the schematics, we find the first mention of the Vance effect. Elias Vance didn't just design rooms, he designed resonators. One specific section of the blueprints, labeled Sector 4G, shows a series of chambers shaped like hollowed-out trapezoids. To a standard engineer, these rooms would be unusable. The corners are too sharp, the ceilings are sloped at a mathematically aggressive 17-degree angle, and the doors are offset from the center of the walls. However, if you apply the principles of wave physics to this layout, a chilling reality emerges. These rooms were designed to trap sound, bouncing it back and forth until the waves stacked on top of one another, amplifying their power without increasing their volume. The monitor flickers, a brief moment of digital instability that mirrors the unease of the research. In these blueprints, the walls are not described by their thickness or their material, but by their acoustic impedance. The lead lining, hidden behind 2 feet of specialized concrete, served a dual purpose. It prevented the frequency from leaking out of the building, and it ensured that the internal resonance remained pure, untouched by the noise of the outside world. This was a laboratory of silence, or rather, a laboratory of the sound that humans cannot hear, but can only feel. As we move to the third level of the building, the blueprints become even more complex. Here, the tapering hallways lead to a central void, a 5-story shaft that runs through the heart of the structure. The blueprints labeled this as the resonance chimney. It functioned like an inverted organ pipe. The ventilation system, which we previously noted as being far too large for the building's square footage, was connected directly to this shaft. The high-powered industrial fans didn't just move air, they pulsed it. They were the lungs of the building. And the resonance chimney was the throat. The intellectual curiosity of the collective led us to investigate the specific dimensions of this chimney. It was exactly 18.98 meters wide. This is not a coincidence. In the world of classified science, there are no coincidences. That width corresponds perfectly to the wavelength of the ghost frequency. The building was literally sized to fit the sound. Every architectural choice, from the placement of the support pillars to the density of the floor tiles, was a calculated move in a game of psychological warfare. The blueprints show that the elevators were located at the far edges of the building, forcing the staff to walk through the higher resonance zones multiple times a day. The staff weren't just workers. They were the medium through which the building's frequency was being tested. They were the biological sensors in a giant concrete experiment. The air in the archive grows colder as we realize the level of detail Vance put into the design. He even accounted for the human body's water content. A handwritten note in the margin of the level 3 schematic reads, "The fluid in the inner ear will respond first. By day 14, the ocular fluid will begin to shimmer. The building will not be seen. It will be experienced as a permanent state of dread." When we attempt to model the airflow of Site 19 Sigma using modern archival software, the program repeatedly crashes. There is an anomaly in the mathematical logic of the blueprints, a series of curves in the basement, levels that the software cannot reconcile with three-dimensional space. These are the non-Euclidean junctions. They are sections of the building where the walls seem to fold into themselves, creating pockets of air that, according to the classified files, would remain perfectly still even when the rest of the building was under high-pressure ventilation. A faint static hiss begins to fill the room, a background noise that seems to emanate from the very data we are analyzing. We are looking at the schematics for the acoustic sinks. These were small, windowless rooms, located at the end of each tapered corridor. According to the employee logs, these were designated as quiet zones for workers to take their breaks. But the blueprints tell a different story. These rooms were the focal points of the resonance. They were where the infrasound waves converged. A person sitting in one of these rooms wouldn't hear anything, but their nervous system would be bombarded by a concentrated beam of subaudible vibration. The declassified reports from the Omaha sites suggest that these rooms were the site of the first gray man sightings. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a hallucination in the traditional sense. It was the result of the architecture. When the 18.98 Hz frequency hits the human eye, it causes the vitreous humor, the fluid inside the eye, to vibrate. This creates shadows in the peripheral vision, dark shapes that seem to move and vanish as soon as you look at them. Vance knew this. He designed the lighting in the hallways to be low intensity and flickering, specifically to enhance the effect of these vibrational shadows. The cold, analytical dread of the collective deepens as we find the blueprints for the building's core. Deep beneath the resonance chimney, There was a chamber known as the null point. This room was entirely lined with a substance referred to only as material sheaths. The schematics showed that this room was the only place in the building where the frequency was 0. It was perfectly silent. It was also where the architect, Elias Vance, spent most of his time. Why would the man who designed the loudest building on Earth need a room of absolute silence? The archival notes suggest that Vance was terrified of his own creation. He knew that the 18.98 Hz frequency wasn't just a physical phenomenon, it was a psychological trigger. It opened a door in the human mind that was never meant to be opened. The null point was his only refuge from the very architecture he had unleashed upon the world. The documents contain a series of retention logs for the staff. These logs track the psychological decay of the employees over the 90-day period. By the second month, the acoustic sinks were no longer being used for breaks. They were being used for re-education. The blueprints show that these rooms were equipped with hidden microphones and speakers, allowing the scientists to observe the effects of varying frequencies on the subjects in real time. The building was a living, breathing instrument of control. As we delve deeper into the final set of blueprints, we find a section that was added just weeks before the building's erasure. These are the emergency inversion schematics. It appears that Vance realized the experiment had gone too far. The frequency was no longer just vibrating the eyes and the ears of the staff. It was beginning to affect the very structure of the building itself. The reinforced concrete was developing microscopic fractures not from physical stress, but from harmonic fatigue. The building was literally shaking itself apart at a molecular level. The monitor flickers, a sharp white flash of light that momentarily blinds the observer. In the corner of the room, the faint smell of ozone intensifies. We are reading the architect's final warning scrawled across the back of a structural load diagram. The building has found its own voice. It no longer requires the fans to generate the signal. The wind passing through the ventilation grills is enough to sustain the resonance. We have built a machine that breathes on its own, and it is breathing us. This explains the midnight evacuation. The blueprints for the emergency inversion describe a process of controlled implosion, but not from the outside in. They intended to collapse the building into the hollow resonance chimney at its core. This would effectively bury the gray box inside itself, creating a tomb of concrete that would act as a permanent muffler for the X frequency. But as we look at the modern-day soil samples from 400 to North Street, we find evidence that the inversion wasn't entirely successful. The blueprints show that the lead springs beneath the foundation were meant to absorb the shock of the collapse. However, the seismic data from October 1972 shows a sustained harmonic oscillation that lasted for 3 hours after the building was demolished. The ground didn't just shake. It hummed. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 audience will focus on the most disturbing detail of the inversion blueprints, the personnel recovery section, or rather, the lack of one. There is no plan for the safe evacuation of the 400 staff members. The blueprints show that the acoustic sinks were locked from the outside during the inversion process. The ghost frequency was not meant to be turned off. It was meant to be sealed underground, with the observers and the subjects still inside. The archival researcher feels a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature of the room. We are looking at a mass grave disguised as an architectural anomaly. The discrepancy in the maps is not just a government cover-up. It is a seal on a tomb. The infrasound citadel was not destroyed. It was merely moved out of sight. It sits beneath the empty lot in Omaha, a giant concrete resonator that is still, to this day, vibrating at 18.98 Hz. The sensory cues of the archive, the cold air, the flickering light, the smell of dust all point to the same conclusion. The blueprints are a map of a nightmare. They show us how easy it is to hide a monster in plain sight, provided the monster is made of concrete and sound. As we close the second folder, the quiet dread remains. We have seen the how. Now, we must understand the why. The final pages of the declassified blueprints are dedicated to the after-action report. On Project 19 Sigma, the tone of these documents is clinical, analytical, and utterly devoid of human empathy. They refer to the loss of the building and its inhabitants as a necessary expenditure in the pursuit of acoustic supremacy. The report concludes that while the building was structurally unstable, the psychological resonance was a total success. They had proven that a specific frequency could induce a state of permanent, untraceable submissiveness in a large population. As we sit in the dim light of the archive, the realization hits. Site 19 Sigma was only a prototype. The blueprints we have studied tonight were the first draft for a new kind of urban design. If a single building could do this to 400 people, What could a city do? What if the tapering hallways and the resonant concrete weren't limited to a single empty lot in Nebraska? You begin to think about the modern skyline, the brutalist government buildings of the 1970s, the windowless data centers that populate our cities today, the ventilation systems that hum in the background of our offices and our homes. You think about the peripheral vision glitches you've experienced in late-night office buildings, the unexplained nausea, the sense of being watched when you are perfectly alone. The monitor flickers one last time before going dark. The silence in the archive is no longer peaceful. It is heavy. It is the silence of the null point. We have followed the lines on the blueprints to the edge of the abyss. We have seen the geometry of the ghost frequency and the architecture of pure infrasound. But there is one question that the blueprints cannot answer. Why 18.98 Hz? What is it about this specific frequency that causes the human eye to resonate? Why does the brain interpret this vibration as the presence of a gray man? And most importantly, why did the government continue the experiment after the Omaha site was erased? The declassified files hint at a terrifying truth. The frequency wasn't chosen because it was effective. It was chosen because it was already there. The scientists weren't creating the sound. They were trying to tune into something that was already vibrating beneath the surface of the earth. The building was just an antenna. The blueprints for the ventilation system contain a final, encrypted note. It describes a phenomenon known as biological resonance. It suggests that once the human body has been exposed to 18.98 Hz for a long enough period, it becomes a resonator itself. The person becomes the building. The next file in the archive is not a blueprint. It is a series of medical recordings. They are the audio logs of the staff members who survived the first month. As we prepare to listen, we must ask ourselves, if the eye resonates at this frequency, what happens to the mind? The shadows in your room might feel a little heavier tonight. The hum of your computer might sound a little more like a voice. We move now from the architecture of the building to the architecture of the human body. We turn the page to the next classified file, 18.98 Hz. Why the human eye resonates at this frequency. In 1998, an engineer named Vic Tandy discovered a hidden truth that the Department of Defense had already classified decades earlier. The human eyeball has a resonant frequency. That frequency is exactly 18.98 Hz to the uninitiated. This is a mere numerical anomaly, a footnote in a physics textbook. But in the encrypted archives of Project 19 Sigma, 18.98 Hz is known as the ghost frequency. It is the precise vibration required to turn the human visual system into a generator of nightmares. When the air around you pulses at this specific rate, your eyes do not merely see, they begin to oscillate within their sockets. This mechanical vibration causes the vitreous humor, the fluid inside your eye, to shimmer, creating a retinal smear that the brain interprets as dark, moving shapes in the peripheral vision. The file we are opening tonight contains the declassified medical logs of the Omaha facility, where 400 workers were systematically subjected to this frequency under the guise of an administrative office environment. It reveals a modern paradox that the most terrifying ghosts in history were not spirits, but physiological errors induced by the architecture of the building itself. The erased records of Site 19 Sigma show that the government didn't just find a way to make people see things, they found a way to make them see the same thing. A shared manufactured hallucination that left no trace in the physical world, but was burned into the neural pathways of everyone who stood within those concrete walls. The file was stamped, never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this vault is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the ventilation system, a sound that once you know the secret of 18.98 Hz becomes impossible to ignore. The air in the archive is unnervingly cold, carrying the faint scent of ozone and the heavy weight of static. A single monitor flickers in the dark, casting a pale green glow over the medical charts. As you turn the page, the paper feels brittle, the ink faded but still holding the secrets of a physiological betrayal. We are moving from the architecture of concrete to the architecture of the human eye, exploring the mechanical limits of what it means to see. To understand the dread of 18.98 Hz, one must first understand the clinical perfection of the human eye. It is an organ of light, designed to capture photons and translate them into reality. But it is also a physical object, a sphere of fluid held in place by muscle and bone. Like a wineglass that shatters at the right note, the eye has a breaking point. When the 18.98 Hz frequency was pumped through the tapering hallways of Site 19 Sigma, it acted as a bow drawn across the strings of the human nervous system. The intellectual curiosity of the collective leads us to the specific biological mechanics described in the sigma aggregate reports. Inside the human eye, there is a clear, gel-like substance called the vitreous humor. It provides the eye with its shape and allows light to pass through to the retina. Under normal circumstances, this fluid is perfectly still, but when the environment vibrates at 1898 Hz, the vitreous humor enters a state of harmonic resonance. It begins to ripple. These ripples act like lenses. They distort the light as it enters the eye, creating what the declassified logs call ocular artifacts. To the employee sitting at their desk in Omaha, it didn't look like the room was vibrating. Instead, it looked as though shadows were detaching themselves from the corners of the room. These were the gray men. They weren't spirits. They were the physical manifestation of the eye's inability to remain stable in a weaponized environment. A monitor flickers in the dim archive, and we see a series of digitized sketches from a worker named Sarah Miller, dated September 19, 1972. The drawings are frantic, executed in thick, dark pencil. They show a figure tall, elongated, and featureless standing just at the edge of her vision. Every time she turned her head to look directly at it, the figure vanished. This is the physiological hallmark of 18.98 Hz, because the vibration is most intense in the periphery of the eye. The ghosts only exist in the areas where we cannot focus. The medical logs for Sarah Miller show that by week 4, she was experiencing peripheral saturation. Her brain was no longer able to filter out the vibrational artifacts. The shadows were becoming more frequent, more solid, and more aggressive. She reported that the gray man was no longer just standing in the corner. He was moving toward her. In one entry, she writes, "The air feels like it's made of lead. Every time the ventilation kicks in, the man in the gray suit stands behind my chair. I can feel the cold on my neck, but when I look in the mirror, there is only the concrete." The analytical dread of the researcher settles in as we realize that the gray man was a consistent sighting among all 400 staff members. While the brain usually creates unique hallucinations for individuals, the 98 Hz frequency forced the eyes to vibrate in a uniform way. Because the physical structure of the human eye is relatively standard, the distortions it produced were also standard. The gray man was a biological constant, a phantom created by the intersection of geometry and anatomy. As we look at the frequency charts, we see that the 18.98 Hz signal was not constant. It was pulsed in a circadian rhythm. The intensity would increase during the late afternoon, exactly when the staff's natural energy was dipping. This was a calculated move. A tired brain is less likely to question a visual anomaly. It is more likely to accept the shadow as reality. The archive chill comes from knowing that these people weren't just being experimented on, they were being retuned. The cold, clinical reports in the folder suggest that the eyes were only the entry point. The real damage was occurring in the visual cortex. When the eye sends a distorted signal to the brain attempts to find a pattern. It is an evolutionary survival mechanism known as pareidolia, the tendency to see faces or figures in random data. In the chaotic, vibrating environment of Site 19 Sigma, the brain was constantly being fed random data in the form of retinal smears. The monitor flickers, a sharp pulse of light that reflects off the steel surface of the desk. In the silence of the archive, the faint static of the recording seems to grow louder. We are listening to a declassified interview with one of the site's security guards, a man referred to only as Officer K. His voice is calm, almost detached, which makes his words even more unsettling. "You stop trusting your eyes after the first month," Officer K says. "You walk down a hallway that you know is empty, but you can feel the pressure on your eyeballs. You see a shape move into an office, but when you check the lock, the door hasn't been opened in years. The worst part is the silence. The building is so quiet, yet your head feels like it's inside a beehive. You start to think that maybe the shadows are the real ones, and you're the ghost." Officer K's testimony points to a phenomenon called neural entrainment. After prolonged exposure to 18.98 Hz, the brain's alpha waves, the waves associated with relaxation and light sleep, begin to synchronize with the external frequency. This puts the subjects in a permanent twilight state. They are technically awake, but their brains are functioning as if they are in the early stages of a dream. This is why the archive chill stories are so effective for sleep. They mimic the very state of mind that the 1898 Hz frequency was designed to induce. As you listen to this, your own brain may be settling into a similar rhythm. The slow, analytical pace of the narration, the focus on cold, clinical details, and the rhythmic sensory cues all serve to create a sense of intellectual hypnosis. But in Site 19 Sigma, this hypnosis was a weapon. The gray man sightings were used as a metric for ocular submission. The scientists tracked how long it took for an employee to stop reacting to the shadows. They wanted to know at what point the human mind would simply accept a visual impossibility as a fact of life. According to the final retention log, 85% of the staff reached this state within 60 days. They were no longer bothered by the shadows. They began to treat the gray men as co-workers. This leads us to the most disturbing part of the medical logs, the shared gaze experiment. The researchers would place two employees in a higher resonance chamber and ask them to describe what they saw in the corners. In 92% of the cases, the descriptions were identical. The frequency was so precise that it was literally projecting a consistent image into the collective mind of the workforce. They weren't just seeing ghosts. They were being integrated into a shared artificial reality. The analytical dread deepens as we move to the physical health records of the survivors. Prolonged exposure to 18.98 Hz did more than just cause hallucinations. It had a profound effect on the vestibular system, the mechanism in the inner ear that controls balance. Because the eyes and the ears are both being bombarded by the same resonant frequency, the brain receives conflicting signals. The eyes say the room is moving, but the ears say the body is still. The result is chronic motion sickness. The declassified logs from the final month of the Omaha site are filled with reports of mass nausea, vertigo, and spatial disorientation. Employees would often be found leaning against the concrete walls, unable to stand, their eyes darting back and forth in a state of nystagmus, an involuntary, rhythmic shaking of the eyeball. A monitor flickers, casting a pale, sickly green light across the desk. The air in the archive feels heavy, as if the oxygen has been replaced by cold, static electricity. We are looking at a series of photographs taken of the staff during the final week of October 1972. Their faces are gaunt, their eyes sunken and surrounded by dark circles. But it is their pupils that are the most alarming. In every photo, the pupils are dilated to their maximum extent, even under the bright fluorescent lights of the office. This is a sign of extreme sympathetic nervous system activation. Their bodies were in a permanent fight or flight mode, a state of terror that had become so constant it was invisible. The 18.98 Hz frequency was effectively hotwiring their adrenal glands. They were living in a state of high-intensity panic that had no object, no cause, and no end. The Archive Chill Collective has analyzed these symptoms and compared them to modern cases of sick building syndrome. While modern offices may not be intentionally weaponized with 18.98 Hz, the presence of large industrial HVAC systems, server rooms, and certain types of structural steel can create accidental resonance. Many people who report haunted houses or offices are actually living in spaces that inadvertently replicate the conditions of Site 19 Sigma. But the Omaha facility was no accident. It was a deliberate, clinical exploration of human fragility. The researchers knew exactly what 18.98 Hz would do to the human heart rate. They knew it would cause cardiac flutter, a sensation of a skipped beat that further contributes to the sense of impending doom. They were building a biofeedback loop where the fear caused by the hallucination would increase the heart rate, which would increase the blood pressure in the eye, which would increase the intensity of the vibration. It was a perfect system of self-sustaining terror. The more afraid you were, the more the gray man would appear. The more he appeared, the more afraid you became. By the time the building was erased, the 400 staff members were no longer functional citizens. They were shells, their nervous systems frayed by 90 days of constant subaudible battery. The declassified files include a disposal protocol for these individuals. They weren't sent home. They were moved to a secondary, classified facility in the desert, a place where the air was still and the ground didn't hum. But even there, the damage remained. Once the eye has learned to resonate at 18.98 Hz, it never quite forgets the rhythm. The final section of the ocular archive is the most unsettling. It deals with the residual effect. After the building was demolished, researchers followed a group of survivors for 5 years. They found that even in silent, non-resonant environments, the survivors continued to report sightings of the gray man. The medical theory, proposed by Dr. Erasure Thorne in an encrypted memo, is that the 18.98 Hz frequency had caused neural plasticity. The brain had physically rewired itself to expect the vibration. It had created a ghost circuit, a permanent feedback loop in the visual cortex that continued to generate the gray man hallucination even when the external stimulus was gone. They were haunted not by a building but by their own biology. As we sit in the dim, cold light of the archive, the realization is clinical and absolute. The infrasound citadel was a success. It proved that reality is not a fixed state, but a fragile consensus between our senses and our environment. If you change the frequency of the environment, you change the nature of reality itself. The monitor flickers one last time, a sharp, white flash that momentarily leaves a dark spot in your vision. You blink, and for a second, the spot looks like a figure standing at the edge of your room. It is a reminder of the power of the ghost frequency. Even as you listen to this, your eyes are processing the light from your screen. Your ears are processing the low-frequency drone of this narration, and your brain is attempting to find a pattern in the archive. Don't you think about the peripheral vision glitches you've experienced in your own life? The dark shape in the hallway that disappears when you look at it. The feeling of a cold hand on your neck in a room you know is empty. You've always called these tricks of the light, but the declassified files suggest a different truth. You aren't seeing ghosts. You are feeling a frequency. The archive chill is the sound of the world that exists just below the threshold of our hearing. It is the cold, analytical reality that our modern world is built on top of a grid of hidden signals. Project 19 Sigma was only the beginning. The blueprints for the resonant city were never destroyed. They were just integrated into the next generation of urban planning. As we close this file on 18.98 Hz, the quiet dread remains. We have understood how the eye can be forced to see shadows. We have seen the biological cost of weaponized architecture, but the most terrifying question is still unanswered. What was the goal? Why did the government want to induce mass hallucinations in its own workforce? The medical logs hint at something far deeper than mere psychological warfare. They suggest that the gray man was not just a hallucination, he was a test pattern. The researchers were looking for something else, something that could only be seen when the eye was vibrating at exactly the right speed. The final page of Sarah Miller's diary contains a drawing that was censored in the public release. It shows the gray man, but this time, he is not standing in the corner. He is holding something, a device, a small, geometric object that matches the shape of the resonance chimney in the blueprints. Underneath the drawing, Sarah wrote, "He isn't a ghost. He's a projection, and he's waiting for the signal to change." This leads us to the next classified subtitle, Project 19 Sigma, the classified goal of acoustic submission. We move from the eyes of the staff to the minds of the planners. We are about to discover the true purpose of the 18.98 Hz frequency and what happens when the test pattern becomes the new reality. The air in your room is still. The monitor is dark, but the frequency is still there. We turn the page now to the next encrypted file. The most successful mass psychological operation in American history didn't happen on a battlefield or through a television screen. It happened within the windowless concrete walls of a tax processing center in Omaha, Nebraska. Between September and October of 1972, 400 low-level government employees began to experience a collective auditory anomaly that the classified reports simply referred to as the hum. It was not a sound in the traditional sense. It was a heavy, low-frequency vibration that seemed to originate from the very marrow of their bones. The hidden truth, buried in an encrypted subfolder for 50 years, is that the hum was never a malfunction of the ventilation system. It was the system's primary output by the third week of operations at Site 19 Sigma. The medical logs were flooded with complaints of phantom noise. But these weren't individual cases of tinnitus. This was a synchronized biological response. 400 people, spread across 10 floors of reinforced concrete, all reported the same oscillating tone at the same time every day. The file we are examining contains the erased testimony of those who first felt the air change, the secretaries who couldn't stop their coffee from rippling, the janitors who found the basement walls warm to the touch, and the managers who realized that their thoughts were no longer their own. The anomaly was not in the building, it was in the air. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this room is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server rack. The air in the archive is unnervingly cold, smelling faintly of ozone and old brittle paper. A single monitor flickers in the dark, casting a pale blue light over the desk where the first volume of the 1972 employee medical logs sits. The ink is cold to the touch, and the pages are thick with secrets that have been hidden for half a century. We are stepping back into the first 21 days of Project 19 Sigma, a time when the gray box was still just an office building, and the employees were still just people, before the frequency turned them into something else. To understand the first symptoms, we must understand the mundane reality of the workforce. They were accountants, clerks, and data entry specialists. They arrived at 8 a.m., took 45-minute lunch breaks, and left at 5 p.m. They were the backbone of the American bureaucratic machine. But the grey box was not a normal office. There were no windows to mark the passage of time. There were no clocks on the walls. There was only the concrete, the fluorescent lights, and the air. In the first week of September 1972, the symptoms were nearly imperceptible. The archival records describe it as a general sense of unease. It began with the coffee. Employees in the basement levels noticed that their beverages would never settle. Even when placed on a heavy steel desk, the surface of the liquid would maintain a steady, rhythmic ripple, a series of concentric circles that pulsed exactly 3 times per second. The monitor flickers, a sharp pulse of light in the dim archive. We are looking at a memo from a mid-level supervisor named Arthur Penn. He was the first to file a formal complaint. He didn't complain about the building or the management. He complained about the weight of the air. He wrote, "The oxygen feels thick. It feels like walking through shallow water. There is a vibration in my teeth that stops the moment I step outside the front doors. But the second I cross the threshold back into the lobby, it returns. It's not a sound, it's a presence." Penelligan's observation was the first recorded instance of infrasound saturation. The building's ventilation system was already pulsing at the 18.98 Hz baseline, but at this stage, the human ear was still attempting to filter it out. The brain, however, was already reacting. The intellectual curiosity of the collective led us to investigate the absenteeism rates for that first week. They were at an all-time low. The employees weren't staying away. They were actually arriving early. The analytical dread sets in when you realize why. The frequency was designed to be addictive. In its early low-intensity phase, the 18.98 Hz signal acted as a stimulant. It caused a mild release of dopamine, creating a sense of hyperfixation. The employees were more productive than they had ever been. They were working in total silence, their fingers flying across typewriter keys in perfect synchronization with the building's pulse. They didn't know they were being conditioned. They only knew that for the first time in their lives. The work felt important. By day 7, the focus began to turn into fixation. The staff stopped taking their full lunch breaks. They would sit at their desks, staring at the concrete walls, waiting for the next task. The declassified logs from the security cameras show long periods of stasis. Groups of people standing in the hallways, perfectly still, as if they were listening to a conversation that hadn't happened yet. The archive contains a single, grainy photograph of the cafeteria during this period. There are 50 people in the frame, but no one is talking. Every head is tilted at the same angle, as if they are all tuned into the same hidden signal. This was the first stage of the acoustic submission. The individual was being quieted so the collective hum could begin. As we move into the second week of September, the clinical reports take a darker turn. The dopamine-fueled focus was replaced by a localized physiological distress. The 400 employees were no longer just feeling thick air. They were feeling the hum in their internal organs. The archival records refer to this as the thoracic flutter. A monitor flickers, casting a pale green glow over a medical chart for subject 214, a 24-year-old secretary named Linda Voss. On September 14th, she visited the on-site infirmary complaining of a heartbeat in her stomach. Her chart reads, "Subject exhibits rhythmic muscle spasms in the abdominal wall, claims she can feel the building breathing through the floorboards. Pulse is normal, but her chest cavity appears to be vibrating in sync with the ambient room frequency." The doctor who saw her, a man whose name was later erased from the record, didn't prescribe rest. He prescribed continued exposure. He was part of the research team. He knew that Linda wasn't sick. She was simply becoming a more efficient resonator. By the middle of week 2, the first auditory symptoms appeared. People began to report a low, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to come from behind the walls. They called it the hum. It was described as a sound that was felt more than heard, a sensation like a large truck idling outside a window. But the truck never drove away. The Archive Chill Collective has analyzed the spatial distribution of these reports. The hum was loudest in the corners of the rooms and in the center of the tapering hallways. This confirms the waveguide theory we discovered in the blueprints. The building was concentrating the sound into hot zones. If you stood in a hot zone, the hum would become so intense that it would cause your vision to blur, the first sign of the ocular resonance we discussed in the previous file. But the most unsettling symptom was the shed sleep. Several employees who lived in the same apartment complex near 400 to North Street reported that they were all waking up at exactly 3:14 am. They would wake up with their hearts racing, a cold sweat on their brows, and the sound of the hum echoing in their ears, even though they were miles away from the building. This suggests that the frequency was not just a physical phenomenon, it was a neural imprint. The brain had become so accustomed to the 18.98 Hz pulse that it was recreating it during the REM cycle. The building had followed them home. It had moved from the concrete into their dreams. The intellectual dread grows as we read the janitorial logs from week 2. The cleaning staff reported finding gray dust in the corners of every room. When analyzed, this dust was found to be microscopic particles of concrete and lead. The building was literally vibrating itself into powder. The walls were shedding their skin, and the employees were breathing in the pulverized remains of Site 19 Sigma. They weren't just listening to the building. They were becoming part of its physical structure. By the 3rd week, the gray box had reached a state of harmonic maturity. The hum was no longer a background noise. It was the dominant reality of the facility. This is when the 400 employees began to exhibit the psychotic symptoms. The declassified file contains a series of internal memos labeled Project 19 Sigma, Behavioral Drift. On September 21st, a data entry clerk named Thomas Reed stood up in the middle of a quiet afternoon and began to hum in perfect unison with the ventilation system. He didn't stop for 3 hours. When security finally approached him, they found that he was in a catatonic state. His eyes were wide open, his pupils pulsing with the rhythm of the sound. He wasn't aware of the people around him. He was only aware of the frequency. The monitor flickers, a sharp flash of white light. In the archive, the temperature seems to drop another few degrees. We are looking at the transcript of Reed's exit interview. It consists of only one sentence, repeated over and over. The concrete is singing, and I am the lyrics. This was the breaking point. The frequency was no longer just affecting their bodies. It was overwriting their consciousness. The hum had become a linguistic structure. The employees were starting to communicate in a series of nonverbal cues: head tilts, rhythmic finger tapping, and synchronized breathing. They were functioning as a hive mind, directed by the acoustic output of the building. The archive chill collective has identified a direct correlation between the intensity of the hum and the ocular hallucinations. By week 3, the gray man was no longer a rare sighting. He was everywhere. He was standing at the end of every hallway. He was sitting in the empty chairs in the cafeteria. He was even seen by multiple people at once. Standing in the center of the resonance chimney, the analytical reports from the on-site psychologists suggest that the gray man was the personification of the frequency, the brain, UNABLE, to process the constant subaudible battery of 18.98 Hz, created a visual avatar for the sound. The gray man was the hum. To see him was to hear the building. To hear the building was to become him. One of the most chilling declassified documents is a survey of ambient noise conducted by an outside contractor who didn't know about Project 19 Sigma. He was hired to check the acoustics for a possible renovation. His report was never filed with the city. It was intercepted by the NSA. He wrote, "The noise levels at 402 North Street are within legal limits on the decibel scale, but the pressure levels are off the charts. It's like being at the bottom of the ocean. Every surface is vibrating. I put my ear to the wall on the 4th floor, and I didn't hear pipes or wires. I heard a voice. It wasn't human. It sounded like the concrete itself was trying to speak, but it only knew one word, and that word was a number I couldn't count." This contractor vanished 3 days after submitting his report. His name has been erased from every public record. He is one of the ghost figures of the Omaha discrepancy, man who heard the truth and was silenced by it. As we reach the final days of the 3rd week, the first symptoms had evolved into a state of permanent biological alteration. The 400 employees were no longer capable of functioning outside the building. The declassified medical logs show that when staff members tried to go home for the weekend, they experienced acoustic withdrawal. They suffered from severe migraines, tremors, and a profound sense of existential emptiness. The world outside Site 19 Sigma felt too thin and too quiet. They had become biological resonators, and without the building to provide the frequency, their nervous systems began to collapse. By Monday morning, they would be waiting at the steel doors an hour before the shift began, desperate to get back inside the gray box. They weren't employees anymore. They were addicts. The frequency was their drug, and the architecture was their dealer. Intellectual curiosity of our TO1 audience will note the parallel between this and modern sick building syndrome. But Site 19 Sigma was something far more intentional. It was a test of environmental captivity. The goal was to see if a population could be controlled not through laws or force, but through the very air they breathe and the sounds they cannot hear. The monitor flickers, a final pulse of sickly green light. We are looking at the final weekly summary for September 1972. It was signed by Dr. Aris Thorne. His tone is triumphant. The entrainment is complete, Thorne wrote. The 400 subjects have achieved 98% synchronization with the baseline frequency. The individual ego has been suppressed. The collective hum is now set. We are ready to move to the next phase, the amplification. This next phase is where the story of the Omaha site moves from a psychological experiment to a global threat. The researchers realized that the hum was not just affecting the 400 people inside the building. It was starting to interact with the Earth's Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic frequency of the planet itself. The building was no longer just a weapon. It was a bridge. It was trying to connect the biological frequency of the human mind to the geological frequency of the Earth. And the gray man was the one walking across that bridge. As we close this folder on the first symptoms, the quiet dread remains. We have seen how a building can turn a person into a resonator. We have seen how a hum can replace a thought. We have seen the medical evidence of a mass erasure that began with a ripple in a coffee cup and ended with the total disappearance of 400 American citizens. But the most terrifying part of the archive is not what happened in 1972. It is what is happening now. As you sit in the silence of your own room, listening to the drone of your computer or the hum of your air conditioner, you have to wonder, is the air thick? Is there a vibration in your teeth? Does the room feel like it's breathing? The final page of the folder is not a report. It is a recording, a visual representation of the sound captured in the basement of Site 19 Sigma on the last day of week 3. It is a waveform that looks like a series of jagged teeth. When researchers played this waveform back in a controlled laboratory setting in 1999, the glass in the room shattered instantly. The hum was not just a sound, it was a physical force. The declassified documents mentioned that the 400 employees were recategorized. On October 1, 1972, they were no longer listed as personnel. They were listed as structural components. They were now officially part of the building's acoustic array. Their bodies, their water content, and their pulsing pupils were all factored into the final calculations for the amplification phase. As we prepare to move to the next subtitle, we consider the fate of those who survived the first symptoms. The records showed that, even after the building was erased, the survivors never stopped humming. In the specialized clinics where they were taken, the staff had to wear earplugs to avoid the psychic leakage caused by the patient's presence. The gray box at 402 North Street is gone, but the frequency it created is still circulating. It is trapped in the concrete of our modern cities. It is hidden in the white noise of our digital lives. It is the archive chill that you feel when you realize that the hum you hear in the middle of the night might not be coming from your house. It might be coming from you. The monitor flickers one last time before the screen goes black. The air in the archive is perfectly still, yet the silence is heavy, pressing against your ears like the weight of a deep-sea dive. We have explored the symptoms. We have seen the hum, but we have yet to see the shadow that the hum was designed to hide. The final log entry from Arthur Peneligan, the man who first complained about the rippling coffee, was found carved into the underside of his desk. It was discovered by the demolition crew just before the building was imploded. That it reads, "The hum is not the sound of the building. It is the sound of the things the building has let in. They don't walk on the floors. They walk on the frequency. And now, the frequency is everywhere." This leads us to the most classified part of the Omaha files. If the hum was a bridge, who was crossing it? We move now to the next subtitle, where we explore the most unsettling evidence ever recovered from the site, the Gray Man incident, shared visual glitches. The file is open. The frequency is rising. In the winter of 1972, a classified incident occurred within the walls of Site 19 Sigma that would redefine the limits of human perception. It is known in the encrypted logs as the Gray Man incident. While modern science often dismisses ghost sightings as individual hallucinations, the records from this erased facility reveal a terrifying modern paradox, a shared visual anomaly. 400 employees, separated by reinforced concrete walls and classified clearance levels, all began reporting the same entity. He was tall, gaunt, and wore a suit of indistinguishable gray, moving through the periphery of their vision with a mechanical, vibrating gait. This was not a haunting in the traditional sense. It was a hidden truth of architectural engineering. The file we are opening tonight contains the declassified security logs and internal medical depositions that were suppressed for 50 years. These documents prove that the Gray Man was not a spirit, but a shared visual glitch, a physiological byproduct of 18.98 Hz resonance that had been perfectly synchronized across an entire workforce. The files describe an anomaly where the brain, under the constant battery of infrasound, stopped generating unique dreams and began projecting a singular, government-mandated nightmare. We are looking at the moment the test pattern became a living inhabitant of the building. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server rack, a low-frequency drone that mimics the very subject of our investigation. The air is unnervingly cold, smelling faintly of ozone and the metallic temps of old structural steel. A single monitor flickers in the corner, casting a pale, sickly green glow over the desk. As you pull the heavy, lined folder from its drawer, the ink feels raised and cold to the touch. The paper is brittle, holding the weight of 400 identical fears. We are moving deep into the visual record of Project 19 Sigma, where the lines between what is seen and what is real begin to dissolve into the static dot. To understand the Grey Man, one must first understand the clinical isolation of the Omaha facility. By October 1972, the building had become a closed acoustic circuit. The 400 staff members had been living within the concrete frequency for over 60 days. Their nervous systems were no longer autonomous. They were extensions of the building's internal pulse. It was in this state of total biological entrainment that the first shared glitch was recorded. The first formal report of the Grey Man came from a maintenance worker named Samuel Halloway. On the morning of October 4th, Halloway was tasked with inspecting the ventilation grills in the Level 4 records department. The archives contain his original handwritten deposition, taken just hours after the event. The handwriting is remarkably steady, which the on-site analysts noted as a sign of frequency-induced emotional blunting. "I was standing on the ladder," Halloway wrote. "The hum was particularly loud that morning, a deep, throbbing pressure that made the screws in the vent rattle. I saw him in the reflection of the stainless steel ducting, a man in a gray suit, standing at the end of the aisle. He wasn't doing anything. He was just vibrating, not like he was shaking, but like he was made of television static. When I turned my head to get a clear look, the aisle was empty. But when I looked back at the reflection, he was 2 feet closer." Halloway didn't report a ghost. He reported a visual distortion, but the intellectual dread began when the security team checked the internal monitors. The cameras showed Halloway standing on his ladder, staring into the ducting. They also showed exactly what he saw. For a fraction of a second, a dark vertical smear appeared on the filmer glitch. In the magnetic tape that matched the exact height and position of the Grey Man, the monitor flickers in our archive, a pale blue pulse that mirrors the static on that 1972 tape. The analytical conclusion was staggering. The 18.98 Hz frequency wasn't just vibrating the human eye, it was vibrating the camera sensors. The building was projecting the anomaly onto both biological and electronic receivers. By noon that same day, 6 other employees on Level 4 had filed similar reports. They all described the same gray suit. They all described the same vibrating silhouette. They all described the same sensation of peripheral dread. Intellectual curiosity leads us to ask, how could 6 people, who had not spoken to each other, see the exact same featureless man? The declassified acoustic synchronization memo explains the phenomenon. Because the architecture of Site 19 Sigma was perfectly symmetrical, the standing waves of infrasound were identical in every room. Every employee on Level 4 was experiencing the exact same ocular resonance. Their eyes were vibrating at the same speed, in the same direction, at the same time. The retinal smear created by this vibration was, therefore, identical for everyone. The Grey Man was not an individual hallucination. He was a structural artifact. He was the visual representation of the building's geometry. If the hallways had been shaped differently, the ghost might have been a different shape. But Vance had designed the hallways to be tall and narrow, and so the visual glitch was tall and narrow. The gray color was simply the brain's attempt to interpret the lack of light within the vibrating fluid of the eye. As we turn to the next page of the file, the air in the archive seems to grow thinner. We find a series of shared gaze logs. These were experiments conducted by the research team to see if the glitch could be manipulated. They would place 2 subjects in a room and increase the frequency by 0.1 Hz increments. The results were chillingly consistent. Subjects A and B both report the entity moving from the north corner to the east corner at 1402. Subject A describes the entity's vibrating suit. Subject B notes that the entity has no face. Both subjects exhibit a heart rate increase of 40% at the exact moment the entity glitches toward them. They weren't just seeing the same thing, they were experiencing a collective visual reality. The building had successfully overwritten their individual perceptions and replaced them with a singular architectural output. The Grey Man was the first inhabitant of a new world, a world made of concrete and sound. The cold, analytical nature of the Archive Chill Collective requires us to examine the contagion phase of the Grey Man incident. By the second week of October, the entity was no longer confined to the periphery. Employees began reporting that the Grey Man was bleeding into their direct line of sight. This is a physiological impossibility for a standard infrasound-induced hallucination. Usually, once you look directly at the source of an ocular vibration, the brain corrects the image. But at Site 19 Sigma, the brain could no longer correct itself. The neural entrainment had become so deep that the visual cortex was now generating the Grey Man independently of the eye's vibration. The building had taught the brain how to see the ghost. A monitor flickers, casting a shadow across the declassified medical log of a data entry clerk named Maria S. Her entry for October 11th is a single paragraph of pure intellectual dread. He was sitting at the desk next to mine today. Not in my sight. Right there. I could see the texture of his suit. It looked like wet concrete. He was typing on a typewriter that wasn't there. I could hear the clicking, but it wasn't the sound of keys. It was the sound of the building's fans. He isn't a man. He's a hole in the air. Maria's report highlights the next stage of the anomaly, the multimodal shift. The Grey Man was now being heard and felt, not just seen. This is a hallmark of high-intensity resonant psychosis. The brain, overwhelmed by the constant 18.98 Hz battery, begins to synthesize a complete sensory experience. If you see a figure, your brain expects to hear it. If the building provides a rhythmic sound that matches the figure's movements, the brain connects the dots. The researchers at Site 19 referred to this as the fusion. The staff were no longer reporting glitches, they were reporting encounters. The archive contains a map of the building where every sighting was plotted with a red dot. By October 15th, the map is almost entirely red. The Grey Man was appearing in the cafeteria, the elevators, and even the high-security server rooms. One of the most disturbing sightings involved the resonance chimney. 3 security guards reported seeing the Grey Man standing in the middle of the empty air inside the 5-story shaft. He wasn't falling, he was suspended, his body vibrating so rapidly that he appeared as a grey blur. The guards reported that, as they watched, their own vision began to blur in sync with the entity. This leads to the theory of visual feedback loops. The more people who saw the Grey Man, the more stable the hallucination became. In the world of quantum observation, the act of looking changes the object. In the world of Project 19 Sigma, the act of 400 people looking at the same architectural artifact actually solidified it. Within their collective consciousness, the analytical dread of the researcher is focused on the shared visual glitch as a form of social control. If a government can make an entire workforce see a man who isn't there, they can make them see anything. They can hide objects in plain sight by cloaking them in the Grey Man frequency. They can create no-go zones in a building simply by projecting a terrifying entity into the hallways. As the night deepens in our archive, we find the Omaha Police Department records from that period. There were dozens of 911 calls from the blocks surrounding 400 to North Street. People were reporting shadow figures in their backyards and vibrating men standing under street. The Grey Man was escaping the building. The resonance was traveling through the ground, into the foundations of neighboring houses, and vibrating the eyes of people who had never even heard of Project 19 Sigma. The Grey Man incident was no longer a localized event. It was a localized epidemic of the eyes. The discrepancy in the historical record, the erased files, and the missing block was a desperate attempt to quarantine a visual virus that was spreading through the very air of Omaha. To truly understand the shared visual glitch, we must return to the mind of the architect, Elias Vance. Among the recovered documents is a sketchbook labeled The Inhabitants of Frequency. It contains hundreds of drawings of the Grey Man, dated years before Site 19 Sigma was ever built. Vance wasn't discovering the Grey Man in Omaha. He was inviting him. The eye is a gate, Vance wrote in a marginalized note. If you vibrate the gate at the correct speed, you don't just see what is in the room, you see what the room is. The Grey Man is the true face of the concrete. He is the spirit of the mass. When the 400 look upon him, they are not seeing a ghost. They are seeing the foundation of their reality. This intellectual curiosity brings us to a chilling realization. The building wasn't just designed to be a weapon, it was designed to be a visual transmitter. The tapering hallways acted as lenses. The Sigma aggregate concrete acted as a screen and the 400 employees were the projectors. The monitor flickers, a sharp pulse of static that seems to vibrate the very air in the archive. We are looking at a declassified optical analysis of the building's lighting system. The fluorescent bulbs were not standard. They were modified to flicker at a frequency that was a mathematical harmonic of 18.98 Hz. This is known as stroboscopic enhancement. By flickering the lights at a specific rate, Vance was able to freeze the ocular vibrations of the staff. This made the gray man appear solid rather than blurry. It turned a flickering peripheral shadow into a physical, gray-suited man who could stand in the middle of a room and hold a conversation. The shared visual glitch was a carefully choreographed theatrical production, where the stage was the building and the audience's own eyes were the special effects. But like all experiments of this nature, there was a point where the production took on a life of its own. The gray man began to do things that weren't in the blueprints. On October 18th, a group of 5 employees in the basement reported that the gray man had spoken to them. They didn't hear words in the air. They heard vibrations in their skulls. They all reported the same message, delivered in a rhythmic, subaudible tone. The frequency is too low. Let us in. This is the point where archive chill turns into clinical dread. Who was us? And what did they mean by let us in? The researchers at Site 19 Sigma panicked. They increased the power to the ventilation fans, hoping to drown out the message with a higher decibel of but this only made the gray man more frequent. He was no longer just a man in a suit. He was beginning to multiply. People reported seeing gray crowds in the hallways, hundreds of vibrating, featureless figures standing shoulder to shoulder, perfectly silent, perfectly still. The shared visual glitch had become a shared visual takeover. The 400 employees were no longer working. They were spending their entire shifts standing in the hallways, staring at the gray crowds. The security logs showed that the staff had stopped recognizing each other. They would walk past a living, breathing coworker and ignore them. But they would stop and bow to a vibrating shadow. The building had successfully replaced human social structures with a hierarchy based on frequency. The gray man was at the top, the concrete was the medium, and the humans were the livestock. As we analyze the final evacuation orders from October 1972, we find a startling discrepancy. The orders don't mention the hum or the structural instability. They only mention visual containment failure. The government wasn't afraid the building would fall. They were afraid that if the 400 employees left the building while they were still seeing the gray man, they would take him with them. They were afraid the shared glitch would become the new national reality. The cold, archival conclusion of the gray man incident is perhaps the most unsettling part of the Project 19 Sigma file. After the building was imploded and the 400 staff members were relocated, the government conducted a visual sweep of the empty lot. They brought in high-speed cameras and infrared sensors to ensure that the structural artifact had been destroyed along with the concrete dot. The cameras found nothing, but the people did. Even after the building was gone, passers-by in downtown Omaha continued to report a vibrating gray shape standing in the middle of the empty lot. For years, the city received complaints about a tall man in a gray suit who would appear during thunderstorms when the wind and the rain provided the necessary acoustic energy to recreate the 18.98 Hz resonance in the soil. The intellectual curiosity of our Tier 1 audience will focus on the quarantine zone that was established around the site. The government didn't just fence off the lot. They paved it with a specific type of non-resonant asphalt. They planted trees that were known for their sound-dampening properties. They did everything they could to quiet the ground. But as we look at the modern-day archive chill footage from the site, we see the glitches are still there. If you watch a digital recording of the empty lot at 400 to North Street, you will occasionally see a single frame of vertical static gray, gaunt shape that flickers for a millisecond before vanishing. It is the digital ghost of site. 19 Sigma, the 18.98 Hz frequency has been recorded into the very magnetic field of the location. The gray man is no longer a byproduct of the building. He is a byproduct of the Earth itself. He is a shared visual glitch that has been archived into reality. The monitor flickers one last time, a pulse of pale light that catches a movement in the corner of our research room. We tell ourselves it is just the light. We tell ourselves it is just the tired eyes of a collective that has been staring at encrypted files for too long. But the cold analytical truth is that we are now resonators ourselves. By reading these files, by hearing this frequency, we have entered the Sigma grid. We have seen the drawings. We have heard the depositions. We have understood the geometry. And in doing so, we have tuned our visual cortex to the frequency of 18.98. The gray man is no longer a historical Anomaly in Omaha. He is a potentiality in our own living rooms. The archive chill is not just a story you listen to before bed. It is a frequency you are inviting into your nervous system. As the narration slows, as your heart rate begins to synchronize with the rhythmic pulse of this track, you are undergoing atmospheric entrainment. You are becoming part of the shared gaze. You think about the shadows in your own periphery, the tall shape at the end of your hallway that you've always dismissed as a trick of the eye. You think about the peripheral vision glitches that have become more frequent since you started watching these videos. Are you seeing the gray man, or is the gray man seeing you? The final log from the Omaha facility, dated October 24, 1972, contains a terrifying observation from the head of security. We have cleared the building. The 400 are on the buses, but the cameras are still showing the gray man in the lobby. He isn't leaving, and he isn't alone anymore. Every time a staff member looks back at the building, another shadow appears in the window. They aren't hallucinations, they are copies. The building is making copies of us. The gray man incident was the moment project. 19 Sigma shifted from a psychological experiment to a biological takeover. The shared visual glitch proved that the human mind is not a private sanctuary, but a programmable interface. If the environment is loud enough, if the frequency is precise enough, the mind will surrender its own reality for the reality of the machine. As we close this folder, the quiet dread remains heavy and cold in the air. We have explored the eyes of the 400. We have seen the gray crowd. We have understood the ocular synchronization that allowed a building to project its own ghosts into the minds of the living. But the most classified part of the story is still buried deeper in the archive. If the gray man was a test pattern, what was the final image supposed to be? And why did the medical logs of the survivors show that their eyes were no longer capable of seeing the color red? The next file in our investigation is not about what they saw, but about what the frequency did to their bodies. We move from the shared visual glitches to the physical evidence of a mass biological rewiring. The building was erased, but the people were reclassified. The server room hums. The monitor flickers. The static in your ears is rising. We turn the page now to the next encrypted file, where the true cost of the ghost frequency is revealed. We move from the shadows in the hallway to the secrets in the blood. The records of the relocation center in the Nevada desert have finally been They describe a group of 400 people who no longer required sleep, who spoke in a language of rhythmic clicks, and whose pupils never stopped vibrating. They were the first generation of the resonant class. The gray man was just the teacher. The real lesson was about to begin. We move now to classified medical logs. The workforce as lab rats. The door to the next floor is opening. The frequency is waiting for you. The most disturbing aspect of Project 19 Sigma was not the building itself, but what happened to the blood and bone of the people inside it. For 50 years, the Department of Defense maintained a hidden truth: that the 400 employees at the Omaha facility were never considered personnel. In the encrypted medical logs recovered from a ghost, they are referred to only as biological receivers. These classified files contained the anomaly of a workforce that was systematically transformed into a living sensor array. The records describe a terrifying modern paradox where an administrative job became a terminal medical experiment. The blood tests from the third month of operation revealed something that shouldn't be possible. The red blood cells of the staff were no longer drifting randomly. They were aligning in geometric patterns, vibrating in perfect harmony with the 18.98 Hz pulse of the building. The medical logs detail how the very DNA of these individuals began to show signs of acoustic recoding. This was not just work, it was a biological takeover, an erased chapter of history where human anatomy was sacrificed for structural supremacy. We are looking at the clinical data of a workforce used as lab rats, their lives reduced to a series of data points on a vibrating chart. The file was stamped "Never open," yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server sound that feels heavy and cold in the still air. The room is dim lit only by the pale, flickering blue light of a single monitor. As we pull the seventh folder from its steel drawer, the paper feels unnervingly cold, smelling of old ozone and the metallic temps of dried blood. The ink is faded, yet the secrets it holds are sharp and analytical. We are stepping into the bioarchive, moving away from the concrete and deep into the human nervous system. To understand the medical horror of Site 19, we must look at the baseline examinations. When the 400 employees were first hired, they were given standard physicals. They were healthy, unremarkable Americans. But by week 3, the on-site clinic led by the enigmatic Dr. Aris Thorne, began recording symptoms that defied standard pathology. The staff weren't just tired or stressed. Their bodies were becoming tuned. As we analyzed the hematology reports from October 1972, the intellectual dread settles in. The most shocking finding was the presence of acoustic crystallization in the bloodstream. In a normal human being, blood is a chaotic, fluid medium. But in the staff of Site 19 Sigma, the blood was beginning to structure itself. Under a microscope, the white blood cells were seen forming into rigid, hexagonal, lattices. Dr. Thorne's private notes, found tucked between the pages of Subject 114's chart, provide a chilling explanation. The Sigma aggregate concrete is doing more than vibrating the air. It is vibrating the water within the cells. We have observed that the 18.98 Hz frequency acts as a catalyst for a new type of biological organization. The subjects are no longer just living organisms. They are becoming liquid crystal conductors. Their blood is learning to store the building's frequency. The analytical nature of these logs is what makes them so hypnotic. The report doesn't focus on the pain of the subjects, but on the efficiency of the signal. Subject 209, a 30-year-old accountant, is described as having total vascular synchronization. His heart rate didn't just match the building's hum, his entire circulatory system was pulsing in a standing wave. A monitor flickers in the dark, casting a shadow across the graph of Subject 209's blood pressure. It wasn't a steady line, it was a perfect sine wave. The doctors noted that his body was no longer fighting the vibration, it was amplifying it. He had become a biological tuning fork. The Archive Chill Collective has cross-referenced these logs with the food and water consumption records. The staff were being fed a specific diet, high in trace minerals and heavy metals. This wasn't for nutrition, it was to increase the electrical conductivity of their tissues. They were being turned into an antenna. One entry, dated October 12, describes a mass epistaxis incident. On that afternoon, 60 employees on the 4th floor simultaneously suffered from severe nosebleeds. But the blood didn't drip. According to the medical staff, the blood vibrated out of the nostrils in a fine mist, hanging in the air for several seconds before settling onto the desks in a perfect geometric circle. The clinical coldness of the reporting is unnerving. The event lasted 45 seconds, the log reads. Frequency was maintained. No loss of productivity recorded. Subjects returned to their typewriters immediately. The resonance is holding. This is the hidden truth of the Omaha workforce. They weren't just working in a building, they were the building's nervous system. Their bodies were being re-engineered to process a signal that the concrete alone couldn't handle. Every heartbeat was a pulse in the machine. Every breath was a movement of the internal bellows. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 audience will find this biological integration both fascinating and terrifying. It suggests that the boundary between architecture and biology is much thinner than we believe. If you provide the right frequency, the human body will rearrange its own chemistry to match its environment. The medical logs move from the blood to the eyes. We have already explored the gray man and the ocular resonance, but the classified medical logs reveal a deeper physical decay. The eyes of the 400 staff members were undergoing a process called retinal thinning. The monitor flickers, a pale, sickly green light catching the pupillary observation charts from week 6. In these charts, the doctors recorded a phenomenon known as microsaccadic entrainment. Under normal conditions, the human eye makes tiny, involuntary movements to keep an image focused. But in Site 19 Sigma, these movements were being overwritten by the 18.98 Hz hum. Subject 380, pupil dilation is permanent, the log states. The iris no longer reacts to light. Instead, it oscillates at a rate of 19 cycles per second. The subject reports that the world appears as a series of overlapping frames. They are seeing the in-between, the moments of time that the brain usually erases. This explains why the staff were seeing the gray man so clearly. Their eyes had been physically altered to capture a faster rate of reality. They were seeing the flicker rate of existence. But the cost was devastating. The ocular fluid was becoming cloudy, filled with microscopic debris from the vibrating tissues. The Archive Chill Collective found a declassified video of an eye exam conducted on October 18, 1972. The camera is zoomed in on a staff member's eye. Even in the grainy black and white footage, you can see the vibration. The iris is a blur, a gray ring that seems to be humming. As the doctor shines a light into the eye, the subject doesn't blink. They just stare, their pupil pulsing with a mechanical, rhythmic intensity. They don't see us anymore, the doctor whispers in the audio track of the film. They only see the signal. If we turn off the fans, I think their eyes would literally explode from the sudden lack of pressure. The analytical dread is focused on the fact that this wasn't an accidental side effect. Dr. Thorne's logs show that he was testing the transmission of information through ocular resonance. He believed that by vibrating the eye, he could bypass the conscious mind and write data directly onto the retina. The staff weren't just lab rats in terms of their health, they were hard drives. The building was downloading its secrets into their physical bodies. This is why the 400 people had to be erased. They weren't just witnesses, they were the physical carriers of the classified data. To let them walk free was to let the project's most sensitive information walk out the door. The sensory cues of the archive are cold air. The faint static on the screen serve as a reminder of the ocular silence that followed. When these people were eventually moved to the desert facility, they had to be kept in total darkness. Their eyes had become so sensitive to frequency that even the sound of a human voice would cause them physical pain. They were acoustically blinded. The most clinical section of the folder deals with the brain, specifically the sleep architecture of the workforce. To maintain total control, Dr. Thorne and his team monitored the EEG readings of the staff 24 hours a day. The declassified neural maps show a terrifying anomaly. The 400 employees had completely lost the ability to enter REM sleep. Rapid eye movement sleep is when the human brain dreams, processes emotion, and resets its psychological equilibrium. Without REM, the mind begins to fracture. But at Site 19 Sigma, the hum of the building replaced a dream state. The 18.98 Hz frequency acted as a synthetic dream. We have achieved a state of permanent beta 6, Thorne wrote in a progress report to the doctor. The subjects no longer require the release of the dream cycle. Their subconscious has been replaced by the building's operating system. They are awake, yet they are functioning with the logic of a machine. They report no anxiety, no fear, and no desire to leave. They are the first generation of the resonant worker. The monitor flickers, casting a shadow that looks like a web across the neural map of subject 114. The brainwaves are no longer chaotic. They are a single, flat, oscillating line. This is neural entrainment taken to its ultimate, classified conclusion. The individuality of the 400 staff members had been erased, not through violence, but through the rhythmic, hypnotic repetition of a subaudible tone. The Archive Chill Collective has analyzed the speech patterns recorded in the cafeteria during the final weeks. The staff had stopped using verbs. They spoke in a series of nouns and numbers, their voices monotone and perfectly timed to the beat of the ventilation fans. The hum is the only thought, one employee said during a psychological evaluation. I don't think in words anymore. I think in waves. When I close my eyes, I don't see my family. I see the blueprints of the basement. I see the concrete. I see the gray man. He is the one who dreams for me now. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 audience will recognize this as the ultimate white-collar nightmare. The job didn't just take their time, it took their internal world. Their brains were being used as distributed processors for a massive acoustic calculation that the building was performing. The analytical dread is reinforced by the withdrawal protocols. When the researchers attempted to lower the frequency by even 1 Hz, the staff would begin to suffer from neural collapse. Their brains would misfire, causing grand mal seizures and sudden, violent outbursts of acoustic screaming, a sound that matched the frequency of the building perfectly. They were trapped. Their biology had been rewritten to require the hum for survival, like a deep-sea fish that explodes when brought to the surface. The employees of Site 19 Sigma were now physically dependent on the high-pressure acoustic environment of the gray box. They were lab rats who had been turned into the lab itself. The final volume of the medical logs deals with the genetic resonance. This is the most classified, most shocking aspect of the Omaha project. In the final days before the building was erased, Dr. Thorne conducted a series of cellular extractions. The monitor flickers, a sharp pulse of light that reveals the DNA sequencing charts. These charts show that the 18.98 Hz frequency had begun to physically alter the double helix structure of the staff's DNA. This is acoustic epigenetics. The vibration was literally switching on dormant genes and switching off the genes responsible for individual personality and emotional processing. The subject's genetic material is now reflective of the sigma Gragacode crystalline structure. The log reads, they are no longer biologically human in the traditional sense. They are a hybrid carbon-silicon resonance bridge. If we allow this to continue, the offspring of these individuals would be born with the frequency already embedded in their bone marrow. This is why the personnel recovery footage shows the staff being moved in lead-lined buses. They were no longer just people, they were biohazardous signal carriers. They were leaking the 18.98 Hz frequency into the environment. Their very presence was enough to vibrate the ground around them. The Archive Chill Collective found a footnote in the disposal memo. It mentions that the soil at the Omaha site remains biologically dead because the DNA of the staff was so saturated with the frequency that it contaminated the ground during the demolition. The vibration has been recorded into the Earth's mineral structure. The cold, analytical conclusion of the medical logs is that Project 19 Sigma was a total success. They had proven that the human body is the most versatile material in the world. It can be bent, tuned, and rewritten as easily as a piece of magnetic tape. The 400 lab rats were not a failure. They were the blueprint for the next phase of human evolution, one where the environment dictates the biology. As the air in the archive grows colder, and the flickering monitor begins to dim, we realize that the gray box was never just a building. It was a womb. It was where the resonant class was born, and while the building was erased from the maps, the biological changes to those 400 people could never be undone. They were moved to a stationary frequency environment, a place where the hum would never stop. The final page of the medical archive is not a chart. It is a photograph of a single bone fragment, recovered from the empty lot years later. Under a high-powered scanner, the bone reveals a terrifying hidden truth. The internal structure of the marrow has been rearranged into a series of microscopic, tapering hallways. The bone has become a miniature version of the building at 402 North Street. The architecture had been so powerful that it physically reconstructed the skeleton of the staff in its own image. This is the echo in the bone. It is the proof that once a frequency takes hold, it never truly leaves. It waits in the calcium, in the blood, and in the eyes of those who are touched by it. As we close the 7th folder, the quiet dread remains. We have seen the medical evidence of the lab rats. We have seen the crystallization of the blood and the vibration of the pupils. We have understood that the gray man was only the symptom of a much deeper biological rewiring. But the story does not end in the clinic. To understand why these people were subjected to such horror, we must look at the man who created the nightmare. We must look at the architect's final letter, a document that explains the true purpose of the 18.98 Hz frequency. The server room is silent, yet the silence is heavy, pressing against your ears. The monitor flickers one last time, a pulse of pale blue light that catches a movement in the shadow of your room. Is it the memory of the frequency, or is it the frequency itself? The next classified file contains a single handwritten warning from Elias Vance. It was written on the night the building was imploded. It reveals that the 18.98 Hz frequency was never intended for the workforce. It was a beacon. We weren't testing the people, Vance wrote. We were using the people to amplify the signal for the guest we invited. And now that he has arrived, he refuses to leave. Who was the guest? And why did the architect spend his final hours locked in a room of absolute silence? We turn the page now to the next encrypted file. We move from the lab rats to the man who built the cage. We move now to the architect's final letter, a warning in concrete. The hum is rising. The next floor is waiting. Deep within the structural foundation of the empty lot at 402 North Street, beneath 6 feet of lead-lined topsoil and reinforced concrete debris, lies the only physical evidence of Elias Vance's true intent. It is a classified handwritten letter, sealed in a vacuum-shrunk titanium canister. For 5 decades, this document remained an encrypted secret, erased from every official audit of Project 19 Sigma. This hidden truth reveals that the architect of the Omaha facility did not see himself as a builder, but as a composer of human subjection. The letter describes an anomaly that the Department of Defense spent millions to bury. The building was not just a weapon, it was a sentient resonator that had begun to consume the consciousness of its inhabitants. Elias Vance's final words provide a terrifying modern paradox that the 18.98 Hz frequency was never designed for psychological control alone. It was a beacon, a signal sent into the tectonic depths of the earth to invite something that Vance simply refers to as the guest. The file contains the architect's frantic warning that once the concrete begins to breathe, it cannot be stopped. It reveals that the infrasound citadel was not destroyed because it was faulty, but because it had successfully opened a door that the American government was not prepared to close. The file was stamped, never open. Yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this room is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server rack, a low-frequency pulse that vibrates through the floor. The air in the archive is unnervingly cold, carrying the faint scent of ozone and the heavy weight of static. A single monitor flickers in the dark, casting a pale, sickly green glow over the desk. As we extract the digital scan of Vance's letter, the ink appears dark and jagged, the strokes of the pen cutting deep into the vellum. We are looking at the confession of a man who realized, too late, that concrete has a memory and a hunger. To understand the warning in the concrete, we must first reflect on the man behind the blueprints. Elias Vance was a practitioner of acoustic brutalism, a field that viewed architecture as a medium for frequency rather than form. Paragraphs of his letter he expresses an intellectual curiosity that quickly descends into a quiet dread. He describes the building as a living lung, a structure designed to inhale the ambient noise of the city and exhale a pure, weaponized vibration. The letter, dated October 20, 1972, just 4 days before the facility was erased, begins with a clinical analysis of the acoustic sinks. Vance writes that the tapered hallways were performing exactly as calculated, but the results were manifesting in ways the mathematical models hadn't predicted. The intellectual curiosity of the collective led us to a specific passage where Vance describes the feedback loop of the soul. He claims that the 18.98 Hz frequency was no longer being generated by the ventilation fans. The concrete itself had taken over the task. The sigma aggregate has reached saturation, Vance wrote in a shaky, dark script. I walked through the 3rd floor today without the power on. The fans were silent. The building was dark, yet the hum was louder than ever. I placed my ear against the pillar in room 402, and I didn't hear the vibration of a machine. I heard the vibration of 1,000 hertz. The building is no longer reflecting the frequency, it is digesting the workforce. Every person who has walked these halls has left a piece of their resonant signature behind, and the concrete is using it to sustain the signal. The monitor flickers, casting a shadow that seems to stretch toward the edges of the archive. The analytical nature of this revelation is profound. It suggests that the archive chill we feel today is not just a psychological response, but a residual echo of the people who were consumed by Site 19 Sigma. Vance's letter details how he attempted to detune the building by introducing counter-frequencies into the water pipes, but the structure rejected them. The building had developed an immune system. Vance describes the gray man not as a hallucination, but as the building's visual interface. He writes that as the 400 staff members became more synchronized with the 18.98 Hz hum, the building was able to manifest a physical presence. The gray man was the concrete's way of observing its inhabitants. He was a sentinel, a placeholder for the guest that was still being called from the depths. The analytical dread of the researcher settles in as we read Vance's description of the null point. This was the small windowless room in the basement where Vance spent his final hours. It was the only place in the building that was silent. But even there, Vance writes that he could feel the building thinking. He describes a sense of being under a microscope, of his very thoughts being scanned by the subaudible pressure of the walls. We have built a tomb for the living, the letter continues. The Department of Defense wanted a weapon of submission. They wanted a workforce that could not say no. What they didn't understand is that the frequency doesn't just silence the will, it replaces it. The 400 people on the payroll are no longer individuals. They are the software running on a hardware of concrete and lead. If we don't implode the site now, the signal will travel through the limestone shelf. It will find the other buildings. It will find the city. The middle section of the letter shifts from a confession to a terrifying, classified technical manual. This is the part of the file that was most heavily encrypted. Vance reveals the hidden truth behind the 18.98 Hz frequency. It was never chosen at random. It is a harmonic of the Earth's core resonance. Vance believed that the planet itself was a massive, vibrating organ, and that Site 19 Sigma was a tuning peg, designed to bridge the gap between human consciousness and the geological void. Intellectual curiosity leads us to the term the guest, which appears 24 times in the letter. Vance does not describe a person or a spirit. He describes a pattern of information that lives within the low-frequency vibrations of the Earth's crust. By vibrating the Omaha site at exactly 18.98 Hz, they were creating a landing strip for this pattern to manifest in the physical world. The building was a gateway. A monitor flickers, casting a pale green light over the sketches Vance included in the margins. They show the resonance chimney not as a structural void, but as an eye looking downward. Vance warns that the guest does not understand human biology, it only understands frequency. If it were to fully manifest, it would rewrite the molecular structure of everything within the signal's reach to match its own oscillating pattern. The staff have started to vibrate at the cellular level, Vance wrote, his ink smearing as if his hand was shaking in rhythm with the building. I watched Subject 114 today. She was staring at the wall, and I could see her skin rippling like water. She wasn't in pain, she was becoming transparent. The frequency is thinning the veil between matter and information. We are becoming ghosts in our own machine. The guest is reaching through the floors, and it is using our eyes to see the world for the first time. The clinical coldness of this description is designed to trigger a quiet dread. It suggests that the gray man was only the beginning, a crude, initial projection before the true manifestation occurred. Vance describes the air in the building as being electrically charged, with static sparks jumping between the fingertips of the employees even when they weren't touching anything. The very air was being prepared for the guest's arrival. The Archive Chill Collective has analyzed the inversion protocol mentioned in the letter. This was Vance's plan to stop the guest. He realized that the building could not be simply torn down. If you break the concrete, you just create thousands of smaller resonators. The only way to kill the signal was to bury it alive, to invert the building into the resonance chimney, using the mass of the earth to dampen the vibration. I have convinced the generals that the building is structurally unsound, Vance wrote. I told them the concrete is cracking. It is a lie. The concrete is stronger than ever. But I must persuade them to implode it before the guest fully crosses the threshold. If I fail, the 18.98 Hz signal will become permanent. It will become a part of the atmosphere. Every child born in this city would be born into the hum. They would belong to the guest before they even took their first breath. The final pages of the letter are a reflection on the nature of secrets. Vance expresses a profound intellectual curiosity about what will happen once the site is erased. He knows that the government will scrub the maps, delete the files, and relocate the survivors. But he also knows that you cannot erase a frequency. He warns that the warning in concrete will remain, a phantom signal that will wait for a future generation to uncover it. The monitor flickers, a sharp pulse of light that reveals the last paragraph of the letter. It is written in a much smaller, tighter hand. To whoever finds this, do not trust the silence of the empty lot. The building is not gone. It is merely underground, waiting for the wind to hit the right angle. When the ground hums, when the birds refuse to land, when the shadows in your periphery start to vibrate, know that the guest is still there, and the door we opened is still standing ajar. The analytical dread of the collective is focused on the Omaha Dead Zone. We have seen the soil samples. We have seen the satellite discrepancies. Now, with the context of Vance's letter, we understand why. The infrasound citadel was never meant to be a permanent structure. It was a sacrificial altar made of brutalist concrete. The 400 lab rats were the fuel. The guest was the objective dot. As we reflect on the archive chill, we realize that we are now part of the resonance. By reading Vance's words, by hearing the 18.98 Hz baseline of this narration, we are acknowledging the signal. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 audience is a form of atmospheric entrainment. You are being pulled into the frequency of the gray box. The more you understand, the more you vibrate in sync with the archive. Vance's letter ends with a series of coordinates. They don't point to Omaha, they point to 12 other locations across the United States. 12 other site sigmas built with the same sigma aggregate concrete and the same tapering hallways. The hidden truth is that the Omaha facility was just one node in a massive subaudible network, a network that may still be switched on. The sensory cues of the archive, the cold air, the rhythmic hum of the servers, the pale flickering light halls serve to ground the listener in the reality of the letter. We are not just hearing a story. We are auditing a classified disaster. Vance's warning is not for the people of 1972, it is for us. He knew that the 21st century would be an era of noise, of signals, and of constant, digital vibration. He knew that we would be the most resonant generation of all. If you can hear the hum, the letter's final line reads, you are already inside the building. The analytical conclusion of the collective is that Vance was the first victim of his own design. He spent his final hours in the null point, not to escape the building, but to be the one who witnessed the closure of the door. He died in that basement, according to the erased medical logs, of acoustic liquefaction. His bones had turned to powder, his blood had turned to liquid crystal. He had become the ultimate resonator, a human warning built into the very foundation of the site. The letter from Elias Vance remains the most classified document in the Archive Chill collection. It is a bridge between the physical world of architecture and the invisible world of frequency. As we close the digital file, the quiet dread remains, a heavy weight in the center of the chest. We have seen the blueprints. We have heard the medical logs. We have read the architect's final warning. The picture of Site 19 Sigma is finally complete, machine designed to summon a guest that humanity was never meant to meet. The monitor flickers one last time before going dark. The server room is silent, yet the silence is no longer peaceful. It is the silence of the null point, a predatory quiet that suggests the vibration is still happening, just out of reach. We think about the empty lot at 402 North Street. We think about the lead-lined soil and the birds that won't land. We think about the 400 people who were erased from the census, their lives sacrificed to a frequency that Vance called a beacon. Intellectual curiosity forces us to look at the next folder in the archive. If the building was as dangerous as Vance claimed, how did the government manage to evacuate 400 people without anyone in the city of Omaha noticing? How do you move an entire workforce in the middle of a populated downtown area without leaving a single witness? The declassified reports from the local police department mention a mass power outage. On the night of October 24, 1972, they mention a fog that rolled in from the Missouri River, a fog so thick that it muffled all sound and light for a 3-block radius. This was no weather event. It was the first recorded use of acoustic cloaking, the ultimate application of Project 19 Sigma's technology. The archive chill collective has recovered the evacuation logs that describe a night of absolute unnatural silence, a night where the building didn't hum, it exhaled. The 400 employees didn't walk out of the doors, they were harvested. We move now from the confession of the architect to the logistics of the cover-up. We are about to witness the most clinical, most efficient disappearance in American history. The frequency is reaching its peak. The gray box is about to go dark forever. The next classified file contains the night vision audio reels from October 24th. They capture the sound of the buses arriving at the site, but the sound is wrong. The engines make no noise. The tires make no sound on the pavement. The only thing you can hear on the tape is the sound of 400 pairs of feet walking in perfect, rhythmic synchronization toward the void. It was the night the building was erased from the maps. But as we are about to discover, the evacuation was not the end. It was the beginning of the stationary frequency environment. We turn the page now to the next encrypted file, where we find the minute-by-minute account of the most successful disappearance in modern history. We move now to the night of the silent evacuation. The fog is rolling in. The buses are waiting. On the night of October 24, 1972, the city of Omaha, Nebraska, witnessed a logistical impossibility that remains the single greatest hidden truth in the history of American urban centers. At exactly 11:42 p.m., a 3-block radius surrounding 402 North Street was effectively erased from the sensory reality of the world. 400 government employees, men and women who had spent 90 days being tuned to a classified frequency, were moved from their desks into a fleet of lead buses without a single witness reporting a sound. There were no 911 calls. There were no police logs. Even the local dogs remained silent. This was the debut of acoustic cloaking, an anomaly of engineering that allowed a massive military-grade evacuation to occur in total, unnatural silence. The encrypted files recovered from the NSA's deepest sub-basement revealed that the evacuation was not a choice, but a desperate containment measure. The building had become too loud for the human world to handle. The gray box was no longer just an office. It was a biological hazard, and the 400 staff members were the carriers. The declassified 16mm footage, captured with silent high-speed cameras, shows a procession of shadows moving into the white fog that was later identified as a chemically induced acoustic mist designed to absorb all sound waves before they could reach the street. The file was stamped "Never Open," yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this archive is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server rack, a low-frequency drone that feels like a heavy weight against the ear. The air is unnervingly cold, smelling faintly of ozone and the metallic tanks of old structural steel. A single monitor flickers in the dark, casting a pale, sickly green glow over the desk where the evacuation manifests are spread out. As you run your fingers across the digital scan of the manifests, the ink feels raised and cold, a physical relic of a night where 400 souls simply ceased to exist in the eyes of the law. We are moving into the heart of the silent night, exploring the logistics of an erasure that was so complete. Even the memory of the event was suppressed by the very air of the city. To understand the silence of October 24th, we must first reflect on the atmospheric conditions of the Missouri River Valley. In the hours leading up to the evacuation, the city of Omaha was blanketed in a thick, unnatural fog. To the residents, it looked like a standard weather pattern, but to the architects of Project 19 Sigma, this was the acoustic shield. The intellectual curiosity of the collective led us to the declassified weather logs, which show that the temperature and humidity levels were artificially manipulated using high-pressure chemical sprayers located on the roof of the gray box. The logistical challenge was immense. How do you move 400 people, most of whom were in a state of acoustic psychosis, without creating a public spectacle? The answer was found in the phase shift protocol. According to the encrypted manifests, the 400 employees were divided into groups of 10. They were instructed to leave their personal belongings, their car keys, their wallets, their wedding rings on their desks. They were told they were being moved to a secondary resonant zone for their own safety. A monitor flickers in the dim light of the archive, revealing a series of 16mm stills taken from the internal security cameras. The footage is silent, grainy, and deeply unsettling. It shows the staff standing in the hallways of Site 19 Sigma, their faces illuminated by the pale fluorescent flicker. They aren't talking, they aren't looking at each other. They are standing in perfect, rhythmic synchronization, their heads tilted as if they are all listening to a command that only they can hear. This was the collective entrainment at its peak. They were no longer a workforce. They were a single, biological machine waiting for the signal to move. The analytical dread of the researcher settles in as we examine the bus manifests. The vehicles used were not standard transport. They were decommissioned military buses, retrofitted with lead-lined walls and active noise cancellation speakers. These speakers were tuned to a frequency that was exactly 180 degrees out of phase with the building's 18.98 Hz hum. This created a zone of destructive interference. Inside the buses, the silence was absolute. It was a silence so profound that it caused physical nausea in the few security guards who weren't wearing specialized ear protection. By 1 a.m., the first convoy began to move. Intellectual curiosity leads us to the city's traffic control records from that night. Every traffic light on the route from 400 to North Street to the outskirts of the city was manually held on green. The power grid for the surrounding blocks was throttled, causing a massive brownout that left the streets in near total darkness. The buses moved like ghosts through the blacked-out city, their engines muffled by the acoustic mist and their tires made of a non-resonant synthetic rubber that left no sound on the pavement. One of the few surviving witnesses, a homeless man named Elias Thorne, who was sleeping in a nearby alley, told a local journalist that he saw a convoy of shadows passing by. He claimed he couldn't hear the engines, even when the buses were only 10 feet away. He described the air as feeling like it was made of wool, and said that for the duration of the convoy's passage, he couldn't hear his own breathing. This is the physiological hallmark of acoustic. Cloaking, the sound waves were being trapped and neutralized before they could reach the human ear. The archival files contain a psychological assessment of the drivers. These men were chosen for their history of hearing loss. They were instructed never to look in the rearview mirror. They were told that the passengers they were carrying were unstable acoustic assets. The drivers reported that the air inside the bus felt heavy, and that the passengers sat in total stillness for the entire 4-hour journey. Not one of the 400 employees spoke a single word. They simply stared at the back of the seat in front of them, their pupils pulsing in time with the hidden rhythm of the bus's internal dampeners. The destination of the 400 employees was a stationary frequency environment in the Nevada desert, a facility known only as Site 22. But the story of the silent evacuation is not about where they went, it is about the void they left behind. By 4 a.m. on October 25th, Site 19 Sigma was empty. The gray box stood as a hollow concrete shell in the center of Omaha. To the casual observer, nothing had changed. The building was still there. The lights were 18.98 Hz. It was a melody, a slow, rhythmic, and deeply unsettling melody that matched the frequency of a human lullaby. The building wasn't just humming. It was singing the 400 erased souls to sleep. This leads us to the most violent chapter of the Omaha files. How do you destroy a building that has become sentient? How do you silence a frequency that has learned how to sing? We turn the page now to the next encrypted file, where we find the minute-by-minute account of the fastest demolition in American history. We move now to 48 hours to dust, the speed of the cover-up. The charges are being set. The countdown is beginning. The building is waiting to scream. The most successful erasure of an American landmark did not take years of bureaucratic decay. It took exactly 48 hours. Between the morning of Friday, October 25th, and the dawn of Sunday, October 27th, 1972, a 10-story Brutalist skyscraper at 402 North Street was physically deleted from the fabric of Omaha, in the classified encrypted archives of Project 19 Sigma. This operation is referred to as the total inversion. It is a modern paradox, how 1,000,000 tons of reinforced concrete and lead-lined structural steel can vanish without a demolition permit, a public announcement, or a single witness to the rubble. The hidden truth, buried under layers of erased blueprints, is that the government wasn't just tearing down a building, they were neutralizing a biological anomaly that had begun to resonate with the city's very foundation. The declassified timeline reveals a speed of execution that defies standard engineering. Once the 400 lab rats had been silently evacuated, the building became a hollow resonator, its 18.98 Hz hum reaching a localized intensity that threatened to shatter the surrounding blocks. The file we are opening tonight contains the minute-by-minute logs of the demolition crewmen who wore lead-lined suits and worked in total, radio-silenced darkness. They weren't using conventional explosives. They were using frequency charges, devices designed to implode the matter inward, collapsing the building into the resonance chimney at its core. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this room is the quiet rhythmic hum of the server racker sound that, after studying the Omaha anomaly, feels like a physical weight against the temples. The air in the archive is unnervingly cold, smelling faintly of ozone and the sharp, metallic temps of old structural steel. A single monitor flickers in the dark, casting a pale, sickly green glow over the desk where the Sunday morning satellite maps are spread out. In the Friday map, the building is a solid, dark shadow. In the Monday map, it is an empty plot of gray soil. The ink on the demolition manifest is cold to the touch, and the signatures are all redacted. We are moving into the final 48 hours of Site 19 Sigma, a period of history that was turned to dust before the world could even notice it was missing. To understand the speed of the cover-up, we must understand the danger of a hollow building. By the morning of October 25th, the gray box was empty of human life, but it was far from silent. Without the 400 biological resonators, the employees too absorb and dampen the infrasound. The standing waves inside the hallways began to amplify. The intellectual curiosity of the collective led us to the seismic logs of the Omaha courthouse. They show a steady increase in localized tremors originating from 400 to North Street. The building was shaking itself apart. The arrival of the Special Operations Engineering Team was recorded by no one. At 6 p.m. on Friday, the 3-block acoustic shield was reactivated. The chemical sprayers on the roof once again filled the air with the dense, sound-absorbing mist. Under the cover of this artificial fog, a fleet of unmarked flatbed trucks entered the perimeter. They didn't carry wrecking balls or jackhammers. They carried resonance collapsers and monitor flickers, revealing a series of declassified photographs taken during the placement of the charges. The images are grainy, captured with high-speed infrared film. They show engineers in specialized helmets, moving through the tapering hallways of Site 19 Sigma with a clinical, detached efficiency. They were placing the collapsers at the acoustic nodes, the exact points in the architecture where the 1898 Hz frequency converged. Intellectual curiosity leads us to the mechanics of these charges. Unlike standard TNT, which pushes energy outward, these devices were designed to create a localized vacuum by timing the detonation to the trough of the building's standing wave. The engineering team could force the concrete to collapse into its own internal voids. It was a surgical strike against the geometry of the building. The analytical dread of the collective centers on the Grayman sightings during these final hours. The demolition team's logs contain several mentions of a visual interference in the work zones. One engineer reported seeing a tall, gray-suited figure standing in the center of the room where he was setting a charge. He noted that the figure didn't move, even as the walls around it began to vibrate with the hum of the collapser. Grayman wasn't just a hallucination anymore. He was a structural residue. He was the last inhabitant of the Sigma grid, and he refused to leave. By Saturday morning, the building was wired from the sub-basement to the roof. The resonance chimney, the 5-story void we discovered in the blueprints, was now filled with a proprietary, liquid lead slurry. This was the muffler. When the building collapsed, this slurry would absorb the final, massive pulse of infrasound, preventing the scream of the concrete from traveling into the city's water table. The archival records show that the city of Omaha remained in a state of weaponized rest throughout Saturday. The power grid continued to be throttled. The residents in the surrounding apartments reported a lingering sense of lethargy, a heavy, dreamless sleep that kept them away from their windows. The government wasn't just hiding the building, they were hiding the reality of its destruction. The analytical nature of the operation is most evident in the data sterilization logs. While the engineers were wiring the building, a separate team was in the basement incinerating the last of the physical records. They weren't just burning paper, they were scrubbing the magnetic tapes, erasing the voice recordings of the 400 staff members, and melting down the acoustic marbles we noted earlier. Every trace of the experiment's human element was being converted into thermal energy. The final countdown began at 3 a.m. on Sunday, October 27th. The silent night had reached its absolute peak. The monitor flickers in the archive, casting a pale green glow over the inversion sequence document. It describes a process where the building would be folded into the earth. In less than 6 seconds, the analytical dread is focused on the master frequency trigger. To ensure the building collapsed cleanly, the engineering team had to synchronize the detonation with the building's own 1898 Hz pulse. They weren't fighting the vibration, they were using it as the final catalyst. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the same time the employees used to wake up in a cold sweat, the signal was sent that it was not an explosion. Witnesses, or rather, the few sensors allowed to record the event, described it as a sudden, localized absence of space. The building didn't blow up, it vanished. The 10 stories of Brutalist concrete simply folded inward, following the tapering hallways down into the resonance chimney. The liquid lead slurry acted as a massive hydraulic brake, absorbing the shock and the sound. The Archive Chill Collective found a declassified audio reel from a seismic sensor placed a mile away. When played at normal speed, there is nothing but a faint low-frequency thud. But when the audio is amplified and slowed down, you can hear something else. You can hear the scream of the concrete, a final, agonizing melody that lasts for 0.4 seconds. It is the sound of the Sigma grid being crushed into the void. By 3:20 a.m., where a skyscraper had stood 10 minutes prior, there was only a hole in the ground. But the operation was only half finished. The 48 hours to dust mandate required the site to be leveled and covered before the sun rose. Intellectual curiosity leads us to the debris removal logs. In a standard demolition, it takes months to haul away the rubble, but for Site 19 Sigma, there was no rubble. The building had been folded into its own basement. The inversion was so efficient that the majority of the material was now compacted 30 feet underground. The trucks that arrived in the following hours weren't there to take material away, they were there to bring material in. They brought in 2,000 tons of non-resonant topsoil. This was a specific mixture of clay, crushed lead, and a synthetic dampening polymer. By 5 a.m. the hole had been filled. By 6 a.m. a crew of ghost landscapers had laid down pre-grown sod and planted 12 mature tree trees chosen for their deep, sound-absorbing root structures. The sensory cues of the archive, the cold air, the rhythmic flicker of the monitor mind us of the visual erasure that followed. As the first light of Sunday morning hit downtown Omaha, the residents woke up to see an empty park where a building had been. Because of the acoustic rest and the neural entrainment of the previous months, their brains struggled to reconcile the change. Many of them didn't even notice the building was gone. They simply accepted the park as if it had always been there. Still on, but the hidden truth was that the heart of the building had been surgically removed. The monitor flickers, casting a pale green light over the final security sweep report. It describes the state of the offices. Half eaten lunches were still on the tables. Typewriters were left mid. Cigarettes had burned down to ash in their trays. It looked as if 400 people had simply been blinked out of existence in a single second. The analytical dread of this image is profound. It represents a level of state control that is almost impossible to comprehend. The ability to erase an entire community without leaving a physical trace. Intellectual curiosity leads us to the erasure of the paper trail. In the hours following the evacuation, a team of data sterilizers entered the building. They weren't there to clean, they were there to rewrite history. They replaced the 400 names on the payroll with a list of ghost employees, individuals who had died years ago or who had never existed at all. They altered the tax records, the medical files, and the insurance policies. By sunrise, there was no legal evidence that anyone named Linda Voss or Arthur Peneligan had ever worked at 402 North Street. The sensory cues of the archive, the cold air, the faint static on the screen serve as a reminder of the acoustic vacuum that was created in the building's wake. The researchers noted that after the staff left, the building's frequency began to decay. Without the 400 biological resonators to amplify the signal, the 18.98 Hz hum became jagged and unstable. The concrete began to groan under the stress of the collapsing standing waves. It was as if the building was grieving the loss of its nervous system. One declassified memo, written by the head of the evacuation team, Colonel Vance, a distant relative of the architect, according to the files, describes the odor of the void. He writes that as the last bus pulled away, the building smelled of ionized copper and stale adrenaline. He noted that the gray man was seen standing in the lobby, his silhouette more distinct than ever. The entity was no longer a peripheral glitch. It was a solid, gray shape that seemed to be watching the buses. Leave the analytical conclusion of the collective is that the evacuation was the final stage of atmospheric entrainment. The 400 people were no longer capable of living in a world without the hum. They had to be moved to Site 22 because their presence in a normal city was becoming a frequency contagion. If they had stayed in Omaha, their very presence would have begun to vibrate the eyes of the people around them. They had become walking resonators. The archive chill grows as we realize that the silent evacuation was not just a military operation, it was a medical quarantine. The 400 staff members were the infected. The 18.98 Hz frequency was the virus, and the gray box was the source. But as the sun rose over Omaha on October 25, 1972, the residents went about their business, unaware that the building they walked past every day was now a tomb filled with the echoes of 400 erased lives. The cold, analytical reality of the days following the evacuation is where the modern paradox truly begins. For the next 48 hours, the government maintained a ghost operation at Site 19 Sigma. They hired a small crew of temporary workers from out-of-state men who were told they were doing inventory work. These men were given earplugs and told not to talk to anyone in the city. Their job was to move the personal belongings of the original 400 into a series of incinerators, located in the basement. The monitor flickers, revealing a disposal log. It lists the items destroyed: 400 driver's licenses, 382 wedding bands, 1,200 family photographs, 4,000 personal letters. The erasure was total. They didn't just want to move the people, they wanted to destroy the evidence that the people had ever existed. Intellectual curiosity leads us to a specific entry in the log. Item 401, a collection of 400 identical glass marbles, found in a jar on the director's desk. The significance of the marbles remains a classified anomaly. Some researchers believe they represented the resonant cohesion of the Stafford visual metaphor for their integration into the Sigma grid. Others believe they were used as acoustic sensors to measure the vibration of the building. Whatever their purpose, they were melted down along with the rest of the personal history of the Omaha 400. The Archive Chill Collective found a series of neighborhood interviews conducted by a local university student in 1974, 2 years after the event. She was researching urban myths. Several residents of the apartments facing 402 North Street mentioned that for one night in October 1972, they all experienced the best sleep of their lives. They described a night of total, heavy silences, silence so deep they felt like they were floating in a void. This was the secondary effect of the anti-phase cancellation used during the evacuation. By neutralizing the building's hum, the military had accidentally created a zone of absolute acoustic peace for the surrounding residents. This silence was the bait. It ensured that no one woke up. It ensured that no one looked out the window. It ensured that the 400 people could be moved like cattle into the waiting buses. The analytical dread of this weaponized peace is a hallmark of Project 19 Sigma. They didn't use fear to keep the city quiet. They used the most seductive frequency of all, the frequency of total rest. As we look at the final evacuation map, we see that the convoy didn't take the highways. They took the rural backroads, moving through the small towns of Nebraska and Wyoming in the dead of night. The declassified logs from the Wyoming State Patrol show a series of unexplained reports from that night. Farmers reported seeing a line of ghost buses that made no sound, even when they kicked up dust from the dirt roads. The reports were all dismissed as mass hallucinations or weather anomalies. The sensory cues of the archiver monitors flicker. The cold air brings us to the final exit log of the building. At 4:52 a.m. the acoustic mist was turned off. The chemical sprayers on the roof were purged. The power to the surrounding blocks was restored. The city of Omaha woke up to a perfectly normal Wednesday morning. The only difference was that the gray box was now silent. The hum that had been the background noise of the city for 90 days was gone, and for the first time in 3 months, the coffee at the diner across the street didn't ripple. The patrons looked at their cups with a sense of unexplained relief, unaware that the reason for the relief was that the 400 lab rats had finally been harvested. The building stood empty, its concrete skin cold and its tapering hallways dark. But as the architect Elias Vance had warned in his final letter, the erasure was not the end. It was simply the preparation for the inversion. The night of the silent evacuation stands as a clinical masterpiece of bureaucratic erasure. It proved that a modern government could remove a significant portion of its own citizens from the map without a single protest. The 400 employees were moved to Site 22, where they were kept in a frequency-locked environment for the rest of their lives. They never saw the sun again. They never heard the sound of a human voice that wasn't vibrating at 18.98 Hz. They were the first generation of the permanent resonance. As we sit in the dim, cold light of our archive, the quiet dread remains. We have seen the manifests. We have seen the 16mm stills of the staff standing in the hallways. We have understood the logistics of the acoustic mist. The story of Site 19 Sigma is moving toward its final violent conclusion. The building was empty, but it was still hot. The frequency was still in the walls. The gray man was still in the lobby. Intellectual curiosity forces us to look at the next stage of the project. If the building was as dangerous as the researchers claimed, they couldn't just leave it standing. An empty resonator is even more unstable than one filled with people. Without the biological dampening of the 400 human bodies, the 18.98 Hz hum was beginning to escalate. The building was starting to call out to the Earth's crust with a voice that was getting louder every hour. The declassified reports from the morning of October 25th describe its sustained harmonic oscillation that could be felt in the foundations of the courthouse 3 blocks away. The infrasound citadel was preparing for its final act. The government had 48 hours to destroy the building before the frequency became irreversible. This was the race to inversion. The Archive Chill Collective has recovered the demolition blueprints. They show that the government didn't use standard explosives. They used frequency-matched charges, specialized devices, designed to implode the concrete at the exact moment the vibration reached its peak. The goal was not just to destroy the building, but to invert the sound, turning it inward so it would collapse into the earth. The monitor flickers, a final pulse of pale green light before the terminal begins its shutdown sequence. The air in the room feels heavy, pressing against your eardrums with the weight of a deep-sea dive. We have explored the silence of the evacuation. We have seen the buses move like shadows through the fog, but we have yet to witness the final scream of the building. The final log entry from the data sterilization team contains a shocking discovery. As they were leaving the building on the morning of October 26th, they found a single tape recorder running in the director's office. It was not recording a voice. It was recording the sound of the empty building. When the tape was analyzed decades later, researchers found that the hum had changed. It was no longer a steady. The government had successfully exploited the cognitive dissonance of the population. If you remove an object fast enough, and you vibrate the observer's eyes at the right frequency, the brain will fill the gap with whatever you tell it to. The park was the visual patch for the hole in the world. The analytical conclusion of the collective is that the physical demolition was the easy part. The real speed of the cover-up was found in the bureaucratic erasure that followed on Monday morning. By 9 a.m., every mention of 400 to North Street had been removed from the city's active zoning files. The blueprints we studied in the previous chapters were moved to the 000 archive, a vault that legally does not exist. The monitor flickers, revealing a personnel status update for Monday, October 28th. It lists the 400 employees of Site 19 Sigma as transferred to permanent remote location. In the eyes of the Social Security Administration, these people were still working. Their paychecks were still being issued to shell corporations. Their taxes were still being filed. They were paper humans, living and working in a digital reality, while their physical bodies were being tuned in the Nevada desert. Intellectual curiosity leads us to the city planning memo issued that week. It described the new park at 402 North Street as a gift to the city from an anonymous donor. There were no ribbon-cutting ceremonies, no photos in the Omaha World Herald. The city simply moved on, its collective memory of the gray box fading with every passing hour of the 18 seconds and 98 milliseconds. J-free air, but the archive chill remains in the soil. The analytical reports from the weeks following the demolition show that the Hesido resonance was still present. Even without the building, the ground at the site was vibrating at a subaudible level. The non-resonant topsoil was working, but it wasn't perfect. The gray man continued to be reported by the night shift police officers who patrolled the area. They didn't see a building. They saw a gray mist that moved with a mechanical, rhythmic gait. The Archive Chill Collective found a memo from the Office of Erasure, dated November 1972. It contains a chilling observation about the success of the inversion. The writer notes that, while the physical structure was gone, The acoustic signature of the building had been recorded into the limestone shelf beneath the city. The building is no longer made of concrete, the memo reads. It is now made of geography. The 18.98 Hz signal is being maintained by the natural movement of the Earth's crust. We didn't silence the building. We gave it a larger voice. The cover-up is successful in the eyes of the public, but the anomaly has moved beyond our control. The analytical dread of this statement is profound. It suggests that the 48 hours to dust was not a victory, but a retreat. The government realized they couldn't stop the frequency, so they buried it and hoped that the world would forget how to listen. The speed of the cover-up was a race against it. Realization that humanity was no longer the dominant presence in Omaha. Building had become a part of the planet. As we look at the final images of the empty lot, we notice the sensory cues of the void, the lack of birds, the way the snow melts in a perfect, geometric circle in the center of the park, the way the street lamps flicker in a rhythmic 18.98 Hz pulse. The building is gone, but the archive chill is still there, vibrating just below the threshold of our hearing. The story of the 48 hours to dust is a clinical study in modern erasure. It shows us that the hidden truth of our history is not found in what remains, but in what was removed with such speed that we didn't have time to miss it. Site 19 Sigma was a 10-story monument to human subjection, and it was turned into a city park in a single weekend. The 400 staff members were turned into paper ghosts, and the Grey Man was turned into a localized legend. As we sit in the dim, cold light of the archive, the quiet dread remains. We have seen the inversion. We have seen the acoustic mist. We have understood the logistics of a government that can delete 1 million tons of concrete in the time it takes for a citizen to enjoy a weekend at home. But the most terrifying part of the Omaha anomaly is not what happened in 1972. It is what happened next. The monitor flickers one last time before the terminal begins its final shutdown sequence. The server room is silent, yet the silence is heavy, pressing against your eardrums with the weight of the muffler. We think about the 12 other site sigmas mentioned in Vance's letter. We think about the buildings we walk past every day, the Brutalist headquarters, the windowless data centers, the anonymous city parks. How many other 40-hour erasures have occurred in our lifetimes? How many other gray boxes are currently humming beneath our feet, buried under lid-aligned soil and pre-grown sod? The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 audience is a dangerous thing. Once you know what to look for, the world stops looking like a collection of buildings and starts looking like a collection of visual patches. The archive chill is the sound of the gap between the Friday map and the Monday map. It is the vibration you feel when you stand in a park where nothing will grow. It is the realization that the building at 400 to North Street was not an ending, but a successful prototype. The total inversion was not a way to destroy a weapon. It was a way to hide it in the earth. But as the architects of the cover-up soon discovered, you cannot bury a signal forever. The limestone shelf of Nebraska is a living, moving thing, and as the earth moves, the frequency changes. The 18.98 Hz hum of Project 19 Sigma was about to undergo a geological amplification. The final report from the soil analysis team in 1973 contains a shocking discovery. They found that the 12 trees planted on the site were not dying, they were transforming. The root structures were no longer made of organic fiber. They were crystallizing, taking on the exact same hexagonal lattice structure found in the blood of the 400 staff members. The building wasn't just in the earth was becoming the building. This leads us to the most unsettling chapter of the archive. If the soil is alive with the frequency, what happens to the people who walk across it? We move from the speed of the cover-up to the reality of the aftermath. We turn the page now to the next encrypted file, where we find the biological records of a city that was vibrating from the ground up. We move now to the Omaha Dead Zone. Why nothing will grow. The ground is starting to hum. The next floor is opening. At the intersection of 400 to North Street in downtown Omaha, there is a piece of land that defies the fundamental laws of biology. To the local city planners, it is a simple park, a visual patch created after the rapid erasure of a 10-story brutalist structure in 1972. But to those who study the classified archives of Project 19 Sigma, this empty lot is known as the Dead Zone. It is a geographic anomaly where, for over 50 years, not a single blade of grass has survived for more than 48 hours. The soil is a uniform, ashen-gray, a sterile medium that rejects all forms of organic life. This is the hidden truth, buried beneath the sod. The government didn't just implode a building, they permanently altered the molecular resonance of the earth itself. The encrypted files recovered from the Department of Agriculture's special projects division reveal a modern paradox. While the surrounding city blocks are lush with urban greenery, the Omaha Dead Zone remains a biological void. Every attempt to reclaim the land has failed. Seeds planted in this soil do not rot, they simply stop. They enter a state of acoustic stasis, their DNA frozen by a lingering frequency that continues to hum through the limestone shelf. This is the legacy of the infrasound citadel, a site so saturated with 18.98 Hz that life is no longer compatible with the coordinates. We are looking at the clinical evidence of a terrestrial scar that refuses to heal. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this room is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server rack, a sound that, when contemplating the Omaha Dead Zone, feels like a warning. The air in the archive is unnervingly cold, smelling faintly of ozone and the sharp, metallic temps of old structural steel. A single monitor flickers in the dark, casting a pale, sickly green glow over the desk where the soil analysis reports are spread out. As you run your fingers across the digital scan of the 1973 chemical survey, the ink feels raised and cold. The paper is brittle, holding the secrets of a landscape that has forgotten how to grow. We are moving into the heart of the biological void, exploring the physics of a sterile Earth. To understand why nothing will grow at 400 to North Street, we must first reflect on the muffler, the liquid lead slurry that was used during the building's inversion. When the gray box was folded into its own resonance chimney, the mass of the building was compressed into the sub-basement levels. This created a high-density acoustic plug 30 feet underground. The intellectual curiosity of the collective led us to the subsurface mineral scans from 1974. They show that the limestone beneath the lot has undergone a process of vibrational crystallization. The soil at the Dead Zone is not actually soil in the traditional sense. According to the declassified soil reconstruction logs, the 2,000 tons of earth brought in after the demolition were infused with a synthetic dampening polymer. But the hidden truth is that the 18.98 Hz signal from the buried structure was too powerful for the polymer to contain. Within weeks, the frequency had bled upward, vibrating the very atoms of the new topsoil. This created a phenomenon known as ionized compaction. The monitor flickers, a sharp pulse of light that reveals a microscopic photograph of a soil sample from the site. In a normal environment, soil is a chaotic mixture of minerals, air, and organic decay. But the soil from the Dead Zone is organized into perfect, hexagonal lattice. It looks more like a circuit board than a garden. This is the result of 50 years of constant subaudible vibration. The soil has been tuned. When a seed is placed into this environment, it is immediately subjected to the sigma resonance. The intellectual dread of the researcher is focused on the cellular interference recorded in the agriculture logs. The 18.98 Hz frequency matches the natural vibration of the water molecules within the seed cells. Instead of the water flowing into the seed to trigger germination, the water vibrates in place. The seed cannot drink. It cannot breathe. It sits in a state of acoustic hunger, perfectly preserved, until the wind eventually carries it away. Analytical reports from a 1982 university study, which was later seized and classified, noted that even the bacteria in the soil had vanished. There are no worms. There are no insects. The ground is biologically silent. The study's lead author wrote a marginalized note that has become a cornerstone of archive chill research. The Earth at 402 North Street is no longer part of the biosphere. It has been integrated into the machine. The ground doesn't grow life. It maintains a signal. The sensory cues of the archive, the cold air, the rhythmic flicker of the screen, remind us of the atmospheric rejection that occurs at the site. Birds refuse to land on the 12 trees that were planted during the cover-up. If you watch time-lapse footage of the park, you can see that pigeons and crows will fly in a perfect arc around the perimeter of the lot, never crossing the property line. They can feel the 18.98 Hz hum through their beaks. To a bird, the Dead Zone is a wall of sound that doesn't exist to the human ear. This brings us to the anomaly of the 12 trees. In the previous file we noted that these trees were transforming. The declassified botanical audit from 1995 reveals that the root systems have not grown outward into the city's soil. Instead, they have grown straight down, wrapping themselves around the buried concrete of the subbasement. They are no longer seeking water. They are seeking the frequency. Their wood has become infused with the sigma aggregate minerals, making them incredibly dense and resonant. If you strike one of these trees with a hammer, it doesn't thud. It rings like a bell. The intellectual curiosity of the collective is now focused on the tectonic connection. The Dead Zone is not an isolated plot. It is a vibrational vent for the limestone shelf that sits beneath the state of Nebraska. Because Site 19 Sigma was inverted into the earth, the buried structure has become a permanent part of the geological strata. The 18.98 Hz signal is no longer being powered by electricity. It is being powered by the tidal stress of the planet. A monitor flickers, casting a pale green glow over a seismic chart. It shows that the dead zone has a constant microseismic pulse that is out of sync with the rest of the city. This is the Earth's Sigma bridge. The buried building is acting as a transducer, taking the massive, slow vibrations of the Earth's crust and converting them into the sharp, focused frequency of Project 19 Sigma. This explains why nothing will grow. The ground is quite literally in motion at a molecular level. Any organic structure, be it a root, a fungus, or a blade of grass, is torn apart by the sheer stress of the vibration before it can establish a foothold. The dead zone is a zone of permanent biological instability. The analytical dread of this realization is that the dead zone is growing. The declassified perimeter surveys show that the sterile gray soil is expanding by approximately 3 inches every year. The crystallization of the earth is spreading through the underground water table, tuning the soil of the neighboring blocks. The hidden truth is that the Omaha cover-up didn't stop the anomaly. It simply hid the source while the infection continued to spread beneath the surface. The sensory cues of the archive, the cold air, the faint static of the server rack bring us to the human effect of the dead zone. People who sit on the park benches at 400 to North Street for more than 20 minutes report a localized nausea and a vibration in the soles of their feet. They often leave the park feeling exhausted, as if they have just walked a great distance, even if they have only been sitting still. The medical logs suggest that the dead zone is harvesting the biological energy of the people who enter it. Because their bodies are 70% water, they are perfect resonators for the 18.98 Hz hum. The ground isn't just sterile, it is hungry. It uses the human presence to amplify the signal, just as the 400 staff members did in 1972. The park is not a gift to the city. It is a refueling station for the buried machine. One of the most chilling declassified documents is a soil conductivity map from 2005. It shows that the dead zone is now dark radio signals, cellular data, and GPS coordinates all drift when passing over the lot. The frequency is so intense that it creates a localized distortion in the magnetic field. It is a dead zone in every sense of the word, biological, digital, and geographical. To understand the long-term goal of the dead zone, we must look at the mineralization of the 400. In the previous files, we noted that the staff members were reclassified as structural components. The archival records of the Omaha Dead Zone suggest that the buried building is reconstructing the remains of these individuals. The monitor flickers, revealing a ground-penetrating radar scan of the sub-basement. It shows 400 distinct resonant pockets arranged in a perfect circle around the central chimney. These are the acoustic sinks we saw in the blueprints. But the radar shows that these pockets are no longer empty. They are filled with a high-density crystalline material that matches the signature of the Sigma concrete. The intellectual dread of the collective is the theory of biological remanifestation. The frequency is using the concrete memory of the building to reorganize the atoms of the soil into the shapes of the people who were once there. This explains why the gray man is so frequently seen in the park. He isn't a ghost. He is a structural echo of the frequency, a visual glitch created by the vibrating soil as it attempts to recreate the IB400. The analytical nature of this process is clinical and cold. The dead zone is a 3D printer of the past, using 18.98 Hz as the code and the ashen soil as the ink. But because the soil is sterile and the frequency is inverted, the reconstruction is never successful. It only produces shadows. It only produces gray dust. It only produces a landscape where nothing can live because the land is too busy trying to remember how to be a building. The sensory cues of the archive, the monitor's rhythmic flicker, the ozonated air serve to ground the listener in the reality of the archive chill. We are not just looking at a park, we are looking at a classified failure. The government tried to turn the building into dust, but the dust learned how to hum. A 2012 report from the Office of Urban Resonance, another legally non-existent agency, concludes that the Omaha Dead Zone is a terminal anomaly. They recommend that the site be permanently sealed with a 10-foot thick slab of lead concrete, effectively rebuilding the very box they destroyed 40 years prior. But the city of Omaha refuses. To seal the park would be to admit that the building was there. To admit the building was there would be to admit the 400 people were erased. So, the dead zone remains. an empty grey plot in the heart of a vibrant city, a place where children are told not to play, and where the birds never sing. It is a modern paradox, a park that provides no rest, a landscape that provides no life, and a hidden truth that continues to vibrate through the limestone shelf of Nebraska. As we look at the final images of the soil analysis, we see the most disturbing detail of all. In the center of the grey plot, the vibration has created a resonance pattern in the dust. It is a series of concentric circles that pulse exactly 3 times per second. It is the same pattern that Linda Voss saw in her coffee cup in September 1972. The hum has not changed. The frequency has not faded. The building is still there, and it is still breathing. The Omaha Dead Zone is the physical evidence of the archive chill. It is the moment when the hidden truth becomes a physical reality that you can stand upon. It shows us that the erasures of the 20th century were not clean. They left behind biological and geological scars that continue to affect the Tier 1 world. The 18.98 Hz frequency is not a historical artifact. It is a permanent resident of the city of Omaha. As we sit in the dim, cold light of the archive, the quiet dread remains. We have seen the sterile earth. We have seen the tuned root systems of the 12 trees. We have understood that the grey box was not destroyed, but inverted into a geological weapon. But the story of Project 19 Sigma is reaching its global conclusion. The monitor flickers one last time before the terminal begins its final shutdown sequence. The air in the archive is perfectly still, yet the silence is heavy, pressing against your ears with the weight of the dead zone. We think about the 12 other sites across the United States. We think about the other parks, the other visual patches, and the other empty lots where nothing will grow. The intellectual curiosity of the collective is now focused on the final piece of the puzzle. If the frequency is still vibrating in the earth, then the signal is still being transmitted. And if the signal is being transmitted, someone or something must be receiving it. The declassified files from the National Archive contain a final, encrypted dataset. It is not a report or a blueprint. It is a recording of the signal today. It was captured by a lone researcher who brought a high-fidelity hydrophone to the center of the Omaha Dead Zone in 2024. What he recorded was not just a hum, it was a broadcast. The final log entry from the hydrophone recording contains a chilling discovery. As the researcher lowered the sensor into the soil, the 18.98 Hz hum began to shift. It started to encode a series of coordinates. These coordinates don't point to locations on Earth. They point to empty spaces in the night sky. The building was erased, the 400 were harvested, and the Earth was turned into a dead zone. But the broadcast has never stopped. It has only gotten stronger. This leads us to the final, most terrifying chapter of the Omaha files. We move from the sterile soil to the digital archive. We move from the grey box to the national record. We are about to hear the sound of the signal that is currently vibrating through the ground beneath your feet. We turn the page now to the final encrypted file. The signal today. We found the frequency in the National Archive. The signal is clear. The message is starting to repeat. The guest is listening. The most terrifying hidden truth about the 1972 Omaha erasure is not that the building was destroyed, but that its voice was never silenced. In the modern era of ubiquitous digital surveillance, a new anomaly has emerged within the encrypted servers of the National Archive. Researchers have discovered a persistent, subaudible signal embedded in the background noise of every declassified audio file from the Cold War era. It is a perfect, unwavering 18.98 Hz pulse, the exact frequency of Project 19 Sigma. This is the modern paradox. The government erased the physical structure. They erased the 400 employees, and they erased the blueprints from the public record. Yet the frequency has migrated from the concrete into the very fabric of our digital history. What we are witnessing is the digital harvest. The files we are accessing tonight, once stamped never open, prove that the infrasound citadel was not a failed experiment. It was a successful transition. The 18.98 Hz signal is no longer a localized event in an empty lot in Nebraska. It has been recorded into the magnetic tape of our national memory, acting as a carrier wave for a classified type of information that the human brain is only now beginning to decode. The data suggests that the archive chill you feel when listening to these recordings is not a psychological reaction, but a physiological resonance with a signal that has been waiting for 50 years to be heard. The file was stamped never open, yet we begin tonight. The only sound in this room is the quiet, rhythmic hum of the server racker sound that, when listened to closely, reveals a jagged, mechanical pattern. The air in the archive is unnervingly cold. smelling faintly of ozone and the sharp metallic tang of an old hard drive spinning in the dark. A single monitor flickers, casting a pale, sickly green glow over the desk where the spectral analysis charts are displayed. As you run your fingers across the screen, the static feels like a physical vibration, a phantom touch that travels from the pixels into your marrow. We are moving into the final stage of the investigation, tracing the hidden signal from the Omaha Dead Zone to the screens we look at every day. To understand the signal today, we must look at the nature of magnetic storage. In 1972, when the 400 staff members of Site 19 Sigma were reclassified, their biological resonance was at its peak. Every recording made in their presence, every phone call they placed, and every tape they dictated was saturated with the 18.98 Hz hum. When these tapes were eventually moved to the National Archive for preservation, the frequency didn't fade. It bled like a drop of ink in a glass of water. The ghost frequency has spent 50 years migrating through the digital library of the American government. The intellectual curiosity of the collective led us to a series of background noise profiles conducted by a whistleblower at a major archival digitization facility. He noticed that regardless of the source material, be it a 1950s radio broadcast or a 1980s congressional hearing, there was a consistent subbodable flaw to the audio. When he isolated the 18.98 Hz band, he found that the sound wasn't random. It was a rhythmic, mathematical sequence. It was the building at 400 to North Street, still breathing through the wires. The monitor flickers, a sharp pulse of light that reveals the waveform of the archive hum. It is a series of repeating peaks and troughs, shaped exactly like the tapering hallways of the original blueprints. This is the acoustic DNA of Project 19 Sigma. The building was never intended to stay in Nebraska. It was designed to be recorded. By saturating the personnel and the environment with the frequency, the architects ensured that the signal would be digitally immortalized. As soon as the files were converted to modern formats, the analytical dread of this realization is that we have inadvertently built the perfect resonator for the signal, the internet. The 18.98 Hz frequency is highly compatible with the refresh rates of modern monitors and the low-frequency output of consumer-grade headphones. Every time you play an old atmospheric documentary or a true crime podcast that uses archival audio, you are potentially being exposed to the same resonance that turned 400 people into biological lab rats in 1972. The collective found a declassified memo from the Office of Signal Integrity, dated 2014. It discusses the atmospheric entrainment of the digital workforce. The memo suggests that the 18.98 Hz frequency is being used to maintain a state of high information submissiveness in populations that spend long hours in front of screens. It is the gray box reimagined as a digital environment. We aren't walking through the concrete hallways anymore. We are scrolling through them. The sensory cues of the archive, the cold air, the rhythmic flicker of the monitor, a reminder of the ocular resonance we explored earlier. If you stare at a screen for too long, and that screen is pulsing at a harmonic of 18.98 Hz, your eyes will begin to vibrate. You will see the peripheral glitches. You will see the gray man standing in the reflection of your darkened monitor. The hidden truth is that the ghosts have followed the signal from the soil to the silicon dot. This brings us to the search for the origin. While the signal is everywhere in the archives, there is a specific primary broadcast that remains locked. It is a file in the National Archive labeled simply Project 19 Sigma, Final Summary Audio. It is an encrypted, 24-hour recording of the inversion itself. According to the few who have attempted to decode it, the audio doesn't contain a voice. It contains the scream of the concrete, played at a frequency that can induce cardiac arrest in a healthy adult. Intellectual curiosity leads us from the ground to the sky. If the signal is in the archives, and the archives are on the server, then the signal is also in the atmosphere. The declassified satellite interference logs from the mid-2000s show a series of unexplained spikes in the very low-frequency VLF spectrum. These spikes are centered over the 12 locations mentioned in Elias Vance's final letter, the 12 Site Sigmas. Even though the buildings are gone, the tectonic echo from the limestone shelf is strong enough to be detected by orbiting sensors. The Earth is acting as a massive antenna, broadcasting the 18.98 Hz signal into the ionosphere. This is the universal resonance. The signal today is not just a localized anomaly in Omaha. It is a global carrier wave that is interacting with the planet's natural magnetic field. A monitor flickers, casting a pale green light over a map of the world's signal hotspots. They correlate perfectly with the locations of Tier 1 government data centers and undersea cable junctions. The gray box has evolved into a gray web. The architecture of the weapon has been scaled up to encompass the entire modern world. The hidden truth is that we are all currently living inside a 5-story resonance chimney made of electromagnetic waves. The analytical dread of the collective is focused on the biological response to this global signal. In the previous chapters, we saw the workforce as lab rats. Today, the lab rats are the billions of people who interact with the digital grid. The symptoms are the same: unexplainable anxiety, mass vertigo, and the gray man, sightings that have become a staple of modern internet. Folklore. One declassified report from the Global Health Audit mentions a statistical anomaly. In human pupil dilation, it shows that in Tier 1 countries, the average human pupil is 15% more dilated than it was in the 1960s. This is the hallmark of the 18.98 Hz resonance. Our eyes are permanently tuned to the dark. We are waiting for a signal that our brains haven't quite learned how to process, but our bodies already recognize. The sensory cues of the archival air, the faint static hiss of the speakers serve to ground the listener in the reality of this high-impact realization. We are not just looking at a historical mystery, we are looking at a permanent state of atmospheric subjection. The Omaha Dead Zone was just the first piece of soil to fall. Today, the Dead Zone is the quiet, heavy air in your own room as you listen to this file. The Archive Chill Collective found a final, encrypted dataset from a 2023 deep web crawl. It contains a recording made by a sensor inside the National Archives main vault. The recording is silent for 23 hours, but in the final hour, a voice begins to speak. It is not a human voice. It is a synthesis of frequencies, a voice made of 400 different vocal signatures, perfectly synchronized. It is the voice of the 400 erased employees of Site 19 Sigma, and it is speaking a series of numbers that correspond to the current GPS coordinates of every person listening to this signal. The cold, clinical conclusion of our research brings us back to the human cost. The 400 staff members were moved to a stationary frequency environment in the Nevada desert, but the declassified relocation logs show that they didn't stay there. They were distributed. The monitor flickers, revealing a personnel reassignment map. It shows that the 400 survivors were placed in key positions throughout the National Archive, the Library of Congress, and the various Department of Defense records offices. They were given mundane, quiet jobs: archivists, librarians, and data entry clerks. But they weren't there to work. They were there to nurture the signal. Each of these 400 people was a walking resonator. By placing them in proximity to the nation's historical records, the government was able to infect the physical archives with the 18.98 Hz frequency. Every folder they touched, every tape they labeled, and every box they moved became a new carrier for the Omaha anomaly. They were the biological seed for the digital takeover we are experiencing today. The intellectual curiosity of the Tier 1 audience will note the chilling efficiency of this plan. You don't need a building to maintain a frequency if you have a people. The 400 lab rats were turned into living archives. Even after they died, their physical remains were processed and used to create the Sigma aggregate concrete for the new generation of windowless data centers. We are building our modern world out of the bones of the people who first heard the hum. The analytical dread of the researcher is that there is no off switch for the signal today. You cannot implode the National Archive. You cannot invert the internet. The 18.98 Hz frequency has become a fundamental constant of the modern environment. It is as much a part of our world as oxygen or gravity. The infrasound citadel has achieved its final form. It is invisible. It is universal, and it is permanent. The sensory cues of the archive, the cold air, the rhythmic flicker of the monitor are now at their peak. As the investigation draws to a close, the air in this room feels like it is made of lead. The hum of the server rack has synchronized with the pulse in your temples. You are no longer just a listener. You are a biological receiver. You are the 401st employee of Site 19 Sigma. We found a final, declassified memo from the director of Erasure, written in late 2024. It is a reflection on the success of the Omaha prototype. He writes, "The building at 402 North Street was a success, not because it stood, but because it fell. The collapse was the broadcast, the dust was the signal, and the people were the recording. Today, the 18.98 Hz hum is the most valuable asset in our arsenal. It is the frequency of peace. It is the frequency of rest. It is the frequency of the archive chill." As we look at the final data stream, we see the gray man one last time. He is not in the periphery anymore. He is in the center of the screen. He is the static. He is the glitch. He is the hidden truth that we have spent 50 years trying to forget, but which our eyes have never stopped seeing. He is the representative of the guest, and he is finally ready to speak. The investigation of Project 19 Sigma has come to its final clinical resolution. We have followed the path of the 18.98 Hz frequency from the tapering hallways of a brutalist office in Omaha to the digital grid of the 21st century. We have seen the blueprints of the weapon, the medical logs of the victims, and the architect's final frantic warning. The picture of the archive chill is complete. It is a modern paradox of architecture, biology, and digital control. The intellectual curiosity of the collective is satisfied. We have uncovered the hidden truth that 402 North Street was never an empty lot. It was a doorway, and while the door has been buried under 6 feet of lead-lined soil, the signal it broadcasts continues to move through our world, a subaudible lullaby that keeps us in a state of acoustic submission. The monitor flickers one last time, a sharp, white flash of light that illuminates the cold, still air of the archive. The server rack slows its rhythm, the mechanical hum dropping into a deep, heavy bass line. The investigation is over. The files have been audited. The anomaly has been identified. That as the light fades, the analytical dread remains, but it is now a quiet, reflective wait. We realize that the gray man and the hum are no longer threats to be feared. They are the environment in which we exist. To listen to the archive chill is to accept the frequency. To see the glitches is to acknowledge the structure. We are the inhabitants of the Sigma grid, and the grid is finally silent. The air in your room is cold. The static in your ears is steady. The pulse of your heart has matched the pulse of the building. You are resting in the shadow of the infrasound citadel, and the concrete has finally stopped singing. The hidden truth is no longer hidden. It is simply the ground upon which you stand. The 400 employees have found their rest. The architect Elias Vance has found his silence, and the grey box has found its eternal voice in the National Archive. We are closing the drawer. We are turning off the monitor. We are leaving the room. The investigation is complete. The hidden truth has been processed. The anomaly has been archived. The frequency is holding. The world is still. Sleep now. The file is closed.